The world is very unfair. A long time ago, the highest authority of this world spoke about the traces left behind by the Demon King and the great forest that was covered by demonic energy. Because of this, none of them could use it, since whenever they entered, no one ever came back alive. So, they came up with the idea of throwing those they wanted to kill into that forest, since whenever people caused problems, that would be the best place to get rid of them. Later, in front of this forest, a mother was crying, begging them to return her child, but the guard did not allow it, because the seed of darkness was sprouting within that child. The priests came to pray, and then threw the child onto the roots, a place of exile where no one could survive. Not even the greatest geniuses, knights, or incredible magicians had managed to endure. It was a place where criminals were thrown using divine magic, and if anyone ever came out alive, their sins would be forgiven. But one day, a baby was born with the seed of darkness. His very existence was already a sin. He was abandoned in the middle of the forest, alone. Days later, hunger and cold struck this child. But within his body, something like a seed grew in his heart, and energy began to surge, filling the child's body. Thus, 10 days passed, and the boy was still alive. Then, a demonic jaguar appeared and carried the child away. From that moment, his tragic fate changed. 10 years later, that same boy had grown up and was now hunting a rabbit. But the hunt wasn't easy. He leapt forward, finally managed to grab the animal, and shouted to Alaga that he had caught his prey. This Alaga was the jaguar that had saved him that day 10 years ago. She smacked the animal with her paw and asked Helmut if he was getting used to hunting, even though for now he could only catch rabbits. She told him to pay attention, because this thing was called a core, something all demonic beasts had. If you ate it, you would become stronger and extend your lifespan. But Helmut, no fool, said the prey was his, so he should eat it. Wait, hold on. He couldn't, because the cores only worked on demonic beasts. If he ate one, he would turn into a beast himself and be trapped in this forest forever. Still, he said that even if he didn't eat it, he was trapped here anyway. Since he was still weak, he couldn't leave Alaga's territory, or else the other beasts would hunt him down. But Alaga told him that he could escape, because someone once said it was possible, that someone was a human she had met long ago, though by now he must have died somewhere in this forest. The clever Helmut asked if that man might have survived. She replied that he had been strong in the past, but humans age and weaken, especially in this forest filled with demonic energy. Helmut only didn't feel it because of the seed of darkness inside him. Yet he kept insisting, asking if she had met anyone else here. Annoyed, she swatted his tail, reminding him she had raised him all this time and now he already wanted to disappear. After much pestering, she finally revealed that the place where that man had lived was to the east of the forest. So Helmut ran off joyfully, eager to meet another human in this place. Ahead, there was a strange area surrounded by wooden fences. With no other choice, he jumped over and found a little house in the middle. This was something only a human could have built. At that moment, Helmut's head was slammed to the ground by a man demanding to know who he was. Helmut explained that Elaga had told him a human lived in the east, and he had come here wanting to leave the forest. The man asked why he wanted to leave, warning him that the human world wasn't as beautiful and peaceful as he imagined. Humans were weak, with no claws or sharp teeth, but they were cruel and cunning, always seeking to dominate everything. Helmut explained that he hadn't been born in the forest, but had been sent there as a baby because of the seed of darkness. The man was surprised, since those born with the seed were usually killed immediately. That meant Helmut might belong to an important lineage. That was why Helmut had been abandoned in the forest, because of the seed of darkness within him. As long as it remained inside him, he would be hunted, even outside the forest, and would probably die fighting other humans. But Helmut said that even so, he still wanted to go. Then the old man took him in, saying that before going to the human world, Helmut needed to become one. He explained that to leave, he would need to cross the forest barrier. For now, he had to forget about that and grow stronger, or else he would just pass through and die outside. That was why the man decided to teach him. Inside the house, Helmut complained about the filth, while the old man said that would be his bed. But there was no room for laziness, because there was still much to do, like wearing clothes for the first time in his life. Soon after, they went into the forest, where Helmut began to learn what he could and could not eat. The old man showed him a root, explaining that even though it contained demonic energy, it could be purified with water and eaten. Helmut was amazed, since he had never known plants could be edible. Later, Helmut went to fetch water, when Elaga appeared and smacked him on the ear, scolding him for listening to that human when he never even listened to her. But Helmut replied that the man promised to make him strong so he could leave the forest. Nothing interesting would happen if he stayed. He went off, while Eliga thought he might have a good life. But that good life wasn't today, because Helmut was soon sitting on the ground with his hands outstretched. His training was about to begin. The old man thought this boy was different, born with much more than just the seed of darkness, and so he was worth teaching. After some time, Helmut collapsed, groaning that he was hungry. The old man cooked a vegetable stew, and Helmut was captivated by how delicious it was. A moment later, the old man explained that since Helmut was not a demonic beast, he had no claws or sharp teeth, and the human body had limits. That was why he would teach him to use a sword starting tomorrow. But first, he showed Helmut what a sword was. He picked it up, swung it sideways, then slashed downward. The strike split a rock clean in half. That, he explained, was how humans survived. This was called vis. Just as beasts had demonic energy, humans had an invisible source of power they could use. Even though Helmut's seed had different properties, it was still a similar kind of power. Helmut became excited and wanted to learn it, but he just got flicked on the forehead. His body wasn't ready yet. That was why the most important thing was for him to understand the sword. Even if it was difficult and painful, he had to press on and not give up, because the sword would reward his efforts. A few days later, Helmut was throwing a tantrum because the old man kept criticizing his posture. Still, the more the man observed him, the more he realized Helmut was a strange boy with incredible growth. Even though the seed of darkness usually made humans violent, this child was clever and didn't give up easily. And so, the old man struck Helmut's hand with his sword, asking if he understood the difference. Since he didn't understand anything, the old man told him he would go without dinner. At that moment, Helmut said he was beginning to understand why the amount of damage was different, as well as the speed and the places he had struck, even though the movement looked the same. The old man explained that imitating outward appearances was not enough. He had to understand his whole body connected with the mind of the sword, keeping everything under control. That was why he needed to devote his heart and soul to every movement. Encouraged, Helmut began swinging his sword again, until later he went to the riverbank, thinking he would rest even though it was boring. At that moment, Alaga appeared behind him, saying he had grown quite a lot in such a short time. Helmut then asked her what debt the old man owed her. In truth, that human had wanted to live there, and she had given him special permission. Helmut even teased, saying she didn't like living with anyone, yet she let him stay without even fighting him. But she was the ruler of the forest, and it didn't matter who disturbed her, she would fight them. Still, when she thought carefully, maybe not everyone, because she had been cautious not to be attacked by the serpent during her battles. That serpent was Naho, who lived in the southern region of the forest. Naho had been after that human who lived here. If Alaga exhausted herself fighting, the serpent could come and finish off both of them. She wasn't sure how strong the old man truly was, because demonic beasts exposed their energy openly, while humans naturally concealed theirs, and Naho hated that human, since he had destroyed the dreadful place she had built. Helmut wondered what kind of dreadful place it was. Eliga grabbed him and rushed through the jungle. When they arrived, it turned out to be a human farm, a place where humans were forced to work under the whip of other humans. That other group consisted of females, human women, something Helmut had never seen before. They were being led into a hut to be served at Naho's dinner, since the serpent loved to eat women for their tender flesh. Meanwhile, the men worked until the end of their lives. That was why this place was called a human farm. Among them was a bald man who seemed to be causing trouble. In fact, everyone there was bald, maybe some kind of requirement, but this one wore a cloak and acted as the leader. He was skilled at finding other humans thrown into the forest. Had Helmut been unlucky, he might have become one of them. As Helmut and Alaga were about to leave, a voice rang out. Well, look who it is. It was none other than the serpent Naho, the owner of the human farm. Just feeling the pressure of these two beings, Helmut instantly froze, while Naho remarked that she enjoyed eating young humans. But Eliga simply replied, no thanks, saying she didn't eat men either. She preferred those with tender flesh. Smelling the air, she then asked Helmut what he was to Darien, which, for those who didn't know, was the name of the old man. Alaga swatted the serpent with her paw for bringing her filthy face too close, but Naho said she had smelled that wretch, because it had only been a few years since he came and destroyed her farm. Alaga countered that the boy had stolen the old man's clothes, and if Naho dared touch a single hair on his head, she would tear her apart. Naho simply ordered her to leave her territory. Not long after, Helmut fainted. Alaga carried him back, warning him to be careful from now on. That was why he needed to stay close to the old man. No one knew what that serpent might do. But Helmut stopped and asked if he could become as strong as her and the old man. Ilaga replied that this was a level most humans could never reach, even after a lifetime of effort. It would not be easy, and if he wanted to leave the forest, he would need to give his very best to grow stronger. When the old man returned, Eliga said her farewell and left, while Darien called Helmut back to the cabin. That night, Helmut was writhing in pain, as though his stomach had a hole in it. Earlier, the old man had forced him to eat something before bed. It was nothing less than poisonous herb, and he was told to eat it without complaint, since it would help suppress the power of the seed. He kept groaning in agony, thinking he might die right there, while the old man stood on the peak of a mountain, reflecting on the past 4 or 5 years. The next day, Helmut continued swinging his sword endlessly. Then he asked Darien if his body felt lighter lately because of the poisonous herb. Maybe it was also the effect of the demonic soil. Since the pain had stopped in recent weeks, Darien said it was time. He picked up a piece of wood and spoke about Vis, the power that could not be seen. He had not yet taught Helmut about it, because his body hadn't reached even the basic level. But now, his body was ready to accept Vis. From this point forward, he would learn the training method. Darien released energy through the wood, telling Helmut to feel it in the atmosphere, to control it, and then to channel it into his sword. That was how he should proceed from now on. Helmut grabbed his sword as the old man told him to breathe deeply while fighting, to absorb the energy of nature. He had to think simply and move calmly, because if he lost control of Vis, his body would break first. Their battle began. Helmut grumbled about the old man's speed but kept attacking, focusing on breathing. Darien blocked every move, urging him to use his senses and absorb more energy. This, he said, would be their way of training from then on. Even if it took time, Helmut had to show his will. With every clash of their swords, the old man told him not to lose rhythm and control. 4 years later, Helmut finally cut down a tree with only a wooden sword. The old man said he was doing very well after those years and asked him to show his Vis. Helmut refused, saying that the last time he did, Darien had refused to fight, claiming there was nothing there. Still, he eventually gathered his Vis through the sword, while the old man thought his growth was incredible. Not only did he possess the seed of darkness, but he was also talented. This boy would surely turn the world upside down, whether for good or for evil. It seemed the time had finally come for him to leave the forest, but Helmut said he wasn't strong enough yet. However, if the seed grew any further, he would not be able to cross the divine barrier, so it had to be now. Darien explained that the human world lay beyond the southern part of the root forest, and to reach it, Helmut needed to pass through the divine barrier. In theory, he could pass even with the seed of darkness, since a human capable of weakening the barrier could cross it. But Darien admitted he didn't know exactly where, since he had never tried to find it. There was, however, someone who had: the village chief Erugo, that same bald man in the cloak from the human farm. Darien warned that Helmut would experience countless things in the human world, but tragedy always arrives quietly. And when that day comes, he will know despair, perhaps even sink into the depths of darkness. But under no circumstance could he allow himself to be lost. That was all Darien asked. With nothing else to say, the old man said he was going to take a nap, but Helmut was to return in the morning because he had something for him. That night, Helmut met Alaga again, lost in thought because he was finally leaving this place. It was a complicated feeling. Alaga simply said this was proof that he was slowly becoming human. The next morning, he went to the cabin. When he opened the door, the old man was sitting silently with a sword and a bag before him. At that sight, Helmut felt deeply that the time had truly come to leave, and he vowed to remember Darien forever, his master. And since he was going to the farm, Eliga told him that the wretched serpent was hibernating, so unless there was a major commotion, she would not wake up. Still, if Eliga entered her territory, Naho would sense it. That was why Helmut had to go alone. Outside, Alaga told him that Darien's life had come to an end. She said not to make that face because Darien had lived and died as he wished. Now it was her turn to give Helmut something, an item he had been left with when he was abandoned. He might need it one day. It was a medallion made of pure gold. Inside was engraved the words, "Let there be light upon your path, Margaret Irene." This was probably a sign of his family in the human world. The suffering and fear of others made Erugo more powerful, but eventually, due to the pursuit of a certain mage, his atrocities were exposed, and he was sentenced to death or exile. To avoid death, he chose the root forest, where he eventually encountered the two-headed serpent. So Helmut set off, telling Alaga to take care of herself and not to die. At the human farm, when the chief went to turn off the light to sleep, Helmut suddenly appeared with his sword at the man's neck, warning him not to move. Then the story unfolded. Dark magic was an evil power capable of making even a weak mage strong. There he was granted permission to live in her territory in exchange for obedience and sacrifices. Using magic, he gathered the exiled humans and forced them into submission to Naho. That was how the human farm was created. Erugo became the king of the farm, while other humans were treated like livestock. Naho never interfered with his work as long as he continued to offer sacrifices. Yet while serving the serpent, his ambition grew again. Every winter when Naho hibernated, demonic beasts attacked the farm daily. Still, even during those crises, he found some satisfaction in that life. Until now, with a sword pressed to his neck, he demanded to know what Helmut wanted. What Helmut wanted to know was how to leave the root forest. The bald man asked if he was Darien's disciple, but that didn't matter. If he didn't talk, he was finished. Irugo tried to argue that if he died, Naho would awaken from her hibernation. But if that happened, Irugo would die as well, since Naho could not revive the dead. He insisted that he was the only one who knew how to leave the forest, so killing him would end any chance. Helmut, clever as always, reminded him that mages were good at recording their knowledge. If he died, Helmut could simply search his house and find something. Finally, the bald man agreed to tell him how to leave the forest. He led him down a staircase into the underground, explaining that the method he had discovered was purely theoretical. No one had ever attempted it, nor had the ability to. The only one who might have managed it was Darien. Since Helmut was there, it either meant the old man had no intention of leaving or had already died. Erigo took a book, but before handing it over, he invited Helmut to become his successor and live in that place. Since he was Darien's disciple, he must be strong, unlike the others. But Helmut only wanted the book to escape the forest. Erigo explained that it was a book he had discovered in a mage's hideout before living there. According to it, there was a massive waterfall at the southern border of the forest. There, water and demonic energy awakened divine power simultaneously. That place might allow someone to cross the barrier, but even weakened, it was still a high-level divine barrier, and anyone who failed would have their body reduced to ashes. That was all Irugo knew. Though Helmut despised him, he remembered Darien's teaching, that lives should not be treated as meaningless. So instead of killing him, he struck Irugo hard in the stomach, tied him to a pillar, and warned that he would be released later. As Erigo cried out that his magic wasn't working, Helmut simply walked away, declaring that he was leaving the forest. But Erigo wasn't done. Using some twisted spell, he summoned Lady Naho. The serpent awoke from her hibernation, demanding to know why she had been called. Irugo shouted that it was urgent. Darien was dead, and his disciple was here. Naho was pleased, saying this was finally her opportunity. Meanwhile, as Helmut ran through the forest, he encountered Naho's forces, the demonic beasts under her command. Feeling their overwhelming pressure, he realized he could only run. Soon, he felt demonic energy saturating the entire area. Then Naho herself appeared, declaring that she had waited so long for this moment and could not allow him to leave. For Helmut, that meant only one thing. He would have to pass over her dead body. She lunged to attack, but Helmut dodged. Dust clouded the area, making it impossible to see. Then Naho coiled around him with her massive body. Helmut paused, forcing himself to think calmly. His opponent was strong, but he would not allow things to go her way. Naho opened her mouth, preparing some kind of attack, and unleashed it at him. At that instant, Helmut seized the opening and rushed toward her mouth. She whipped her tail in that direction, but he kept running along it. No matter how powerful Naho was, she still had a weakness, one he could strike with Vis. He slashed directly into her eye. While she was distracted, he knew it was his chance to escape before things got worse. But then Naho bit into her own head and lunged again, clashing her power against his. When the explosion erupted, Helmut slipped away unnoticed. Sometime later, exhausted and battered, he hid in the forest, thinking to himself that the serpent was truly terrifyingly strong. And when he left, she appeared behind him again, because he couldn't hide inside her forest. Then, when she came at him with her huge mouth wide open, Ilaga appeared to face Naho head-on. She told him to get out of there because now the two of them were going to fight, and that was his chance to seek freedom. So Helmut left, while the two women stood staring each other down, with Ilaga saying that Naho wasn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, Helmut, after finishing his way through Elaga's territory, ended up running for 2 days straight. That left him with only one chance. He had to find a way to escape the forest through those two. The place in front of the waterfall was quite different, because there it was almost impossible to feel the demonic energy. But at that moment, feathers began to fall from the sky, for a gigantic bird had arrived, asking what business he had in its territory. This was Igrel, the ruler of the north. Ilaga herself had already mentioned she was someone curious about things. Smelling him, Igrel asked if he belonged to the family of Naho or Ilaga. Since he carried Ilaga's mark, that would mean he was trespassing in her domain. But the boy, prepared, answered that he was there for his own reasons, and what he was about to do could be very significant. She could satisfy her curiosity, because he would be the first one to cross the barrier and leave the forest of roots. She laughed, asking if someone as weak as him could really do such a thing. If not now, then she would never again see anyone try to cross that divine barrier, because humans would always be thrown into this forest. But the only person who could pass through it would be him. So she made an exception. She wanted to see him attempt to cross the barrier. Because of that, she would protect him until he reached it. No matter the result, he asked her to tell Alaga that he had survived and managed to leave the forest. Then he dove and moved toward the waterfall from beneath, because he needed to go beyond the forest of roots. Divinity was the power of purification that protected humans and rejected negativity. Now that power was piercing into him with an agonizing pain he had never felt before. Meanwhile, somewhere else, a group was traveling with a cart. Not exactly with a cart, the supplies were in the cart, while the herder told them it was better to rest so they could travel faster later. If they ran into a demonic beast while exhausted, they would be in deep trouble, so the blonde boy was told to fetch water before nightfall. When he reached the river to get water, he saw nothing but Helmut's battered body lying on the ground. He ran back as if he had seen a ghost. Reaching the group, he shouted that there was a corpse down in the ravine, while everyone else thought he was just joking. The woman in the hat went along with him to check the situation. Underneath, there really was a body. But wait, it wasn't a corpse because he was still breathing. When he regained consciousness, he found himself surrounded by people. The woman explained that this man had gone to fetch water and found him battered at the riverbank. She asked for his name. In any case, this was Tanya, a rank 3 mercenary with a silver medal from the Mercenary Face Corporation. Helmut was still stunned because these were other humans. She went on to say they were in the rotten forest. As for Helmut, he said he only remembered his name and how to use a sword. Tanya decided she would help him, and for the time being, he would be her responsibility. Sometime later, Helmut thought to himself that he had barely survived. It would take a while before he fully recovered. At the moment, his body was weaker than when he first began training, and the seed he thought would disappear was still there. Either way, now that he was in the human world, he couldn't let anyone discover he carried that seed. He would have to pretend to have lost his memories and try to find the owner of that pendant. But to do all of this, he would need to take things one step at a time. The next day, everyone was astonished at how different he looked after a bath. One even asked if he had come from a noble family, while Tanya asked if he was feeling better. On the road, the short one remarked how odd Helmut was, always stroking the horse, saying it was such a docile creature. After some time, Helmut began to lose his breath. Another man told him to put Helmut in the carriage, but no, they decided he would walk, believing he might recover better that way. In the city, the doctor examined him and said there was nothing wrong. Tanya flew into a rage, calling the doctor a fraud for giving such a diagnosis. But no matter how thoroughly he examined Helmut, there was nothing wrong. He gave him medicine, saying his memories would likely return naturally. Outside, Helmut told Tanya he was feeling better. She remarked on how firm his body was, and that since he knew how to use a sword, he must have trained under some master. She then invited him to duel her as a way to warm up since they had nothing to do the next day. In Helmut's mind, Tanya was a rank 3 silver medal mercenary, someone of high caliber and respect in this world. He accepted, curious to see how much strength his body had regained. At the training arena, everyone was practicing. When Tanya arrived with Helmut, the others told her to go easy on him, but she slapped them and said they would duel with wooden swords, with only one rule: they would fight until one of them fell. At that moment, Helmut's body was still far from full recovery, and he could not use Vis. He would have to face her only by redirecting her attacks. The duel began. He charged, she parried, sending him backward. On the next exchange, he sidestepped, only to be kicked mid-air. His body, still weak, felt as though it were moving underwater. While he defended, she pressed forward relentlessly, until finally finding an opening and sending him flying. Victory was hers. She herself admitted he had fought decently and done well. Another remarked that Tanya was an incredible fighter even among mercenaries. The group clapped Helmut on the back, congratulating him. One man stepped forward, introducing himself as Fian, captain of the mercenary group, and a rank 2 gold medal holder. He announced that Helmut had passed the entrance test. Since they had saved him, they didn't want him wandering without memories. They had been watching him from afar before reaching the city, and noticed that, unlike other young men, he hadn't made advances toward Fian's sister. Thus, Helmut received a rank 4 mercenary contract. Everyone congratulated him. He asked the captain how long he would have to stay in the squad. The captain explained that he was free to leave whenever he wished, But once he started a mission, he was bound to it until the end. This was good for Helmut, who still knew nothing of this world. Now he would also learn what it meant to have allies. Later, an old man argued that this mission wasn't fit for a rank 4, but the captain insisted they could trust Helmut, saying he would be useful. Since it was a last-minute addition, they would only pay 1/3 of the normal price for his rank. The Tarik mercenary squad would also join this mission. After the old man left, the captain explained that tomorrow's task was to escort a large convoy. Even if they were ambushed, only rank 3s should fight, since the monsters would be too strong. One man warned that if the Tarik squad tried to provoke them, they should ignore it, since Tarik didn't have a good reputation anyway. With the meeting over, they would gather in the morning. That night, Helmut trained alone, reflecting on the duel. His body still hadn't recovered, but that didn't matter. He would begin training just as he had the first time. The next day, they all set out together through the forest to reach the cargo they were to escort. Old Meals ordered the Face squad to guard the rear. The blonde man pointed out that the others nearby must be the Tarik squad. One of them sneered, asking what the skinny kid was staring at, saying he was so thin he probably didn't even know how to hold a sword. In Helmut's thoughts, comparing his strength to an opponent's was no different than with demonic beasts. That human was probably not the leader, since he wasn't that strong. Still, it was best to keep an eye on him. A few days later, that same guy ended up knocking down the scrawny blonde, claiming it was just an accident. The person next to him even looked like a girl, but Helmut simply ignored them, picked up the skinny one, and walked away. The bully was furious at being ignored again. He was actually a rank 3 mercenary, who had been temporarily demoted after injuring his arm. On top of that, his brother had warned him that if he caused more trouble, he'd be expelled, so he decided the group would have to back him up later. Meanwhile, the blonde was frustrated. Barely 3 days had passed, yet those guys were picking on him every single day. Angry, he grabbed the water bucket and stormed off to fetch water from the river. Down at the riverbank, just as he filled the first bucket, those men appeared behind him, calling him over for a talk. After beating him up, they asked if he had ever bathed with his friend, and in truth, they just wanted to check if he was a man or a woman. That was why they had dragged him out there. When Helmut arrived and saw the situation, he thought these were exactly the kind of people Darien had warned him not to trust. The man ordered everyone to strip Helmut's clothes. Helmut reached for his sword, but before he could act, Tanya arrived, smashing her fist into the leader's face. She demanded to know why the Tarik squad was harassing her members. The loser of a leader claimed they were just having a conversation, but Tanya warned them clearly there had better not be another incident involving her mercenaries. Next time, things wouldn't end peacefully. That night, Helmut went to train alone in the forest. His body was already much better after focusing on healing for a week, though still not fully recovered to use Vis. By morning, the captain warned that the region they were entering was full of demonic beast sightings, so everyone had to be cautious. The men began speculating about what those beasts might look like. Suddenly, one of the men at the front was decapitated in an instant. A demonic beast had appeared. Furious, his comrade charged in, but he was struck aside easily. The monster was far too strong. Now both squads prepared for battle. Helmut and the blonde hid under the wagon. Since Helmut still couldn't use Vis, fighting would be extremely dangerous. He could sense how strong this monster was. The battle began. The rank 2 mercenaries surrounded it, slashing at the beast while the others fought weaker monsters. The fight at the front was intense. Rank 2 mercenaries could use Vis, and they were much stronger than Helmut had expected. The leaders kept the monster occupied while the others handled the smaller beasts. But then the monster suddenly stopped fighting and fled into the forest. Orders were given not to pursue. The mission was transport, not subjugation. The blonde needed Helmut's help to stand, while the others began dealing with the carcasses. They explained that beast hides and seeds could be sold at a high price. One showed Helmut a seed of darkness. The blonde remarked that he had heard such seeds could dominate human minds and turn them into demonic beasts. Those born with one usually died at birth or were sent to the root forest. Helmut finally understood why Darien had said what he did. As long as he carried the seed, he would have to fight against other humans. The whole reason he learned Vis was to suppress the seed inside him. Even now, without being able to use Vis, he had to hide this secret at all costs. The blonde went to examine one of the beasts more closely. At that moment, it suddenly grabbed him by the neck. Helmut reacted instantly, drawing and slashing in one swift motion, cutting the beast clean in half. A strange sensation coursed through him. Tanya, watching, noticed something peculiar about the way he drew his blade. That night, Helmut trained again. His Vis had finally returned. Within 3 days, he would be able to recover fully to his previous level. While training, he sensed something approaching. It was that annoying mercenary. The man sneered that walking alone was dangerous. This time, Helmut wouldn't get help, and so he'd be taught a lesson. Helmut asked if he was really serious about doing something so ridiculous. The man tore off the bandages from his arm. He was fully healed. He threw a punch at Helmet, who caught it effortlessly with one hand, forcing him to his knees. Clearly, the man needed to learn his place. Unwilling to accept it, the man drew his sword, but it was useless. Helmet unsheathed his own blade, slashing across the man's legs. Left like that, he would probably die. At that moment, however, Helmet felt the murderous intent of the seed trying to overwhelm him. He struck his own chest, forcing himself back under control, since he had gone too long without using Vis. When he calmed down, the man had already crawled away, muttering in disbelief about how someone like Helmut could wield Vis. But what awaited Helmut was worse. That same monstrous leader appeared again and crushed the arrogant man. Helmut infused Vis into his sword and launched into battle. After a fierce clash, the beast ran off once more. The others arrived, asking what had happened. Helmut explained the situation. Caleb, who had been tailing him, had been killed by the demonic beast. One of the leaders apologized, admitting Helmut had been put in danger because of their negligence, but Tanya cut him off, saying apologies weren't enough. Helmut had nearly died because they all knew what that man had been doing. Another snapped at her to watch her words, reminding her that Caleb had been his brother. Tanya retorted coldly that if he had supervised properly, none of this would have happened. At that point, Old Mills stepped in, saying enough was enough. They needed to reorganize. Nothing could be done for the dead. As compensation, Helmut would receive the fallen mercenaries' payment. From now on, they had to find a safer way to deal with demonic beasts, since 3 members had already died. Afterward, Tanya scolded Helmut, smacking him around, telling him not to wander alone anymore. Something about her tone reminded him of how Darien used to treat him. The next day, they continued their journey through the forest, fighting demonic beasts. By the end of the day, everyone was exhausted from constant battle. The monsters seemed to be targeting only their squad. The Tarek squad had barely fought at all. That night, in the carriage, Old Mills insisted that Tarek help guard the rear, but Tarek disagreed, saying that instead of security, efficiency was better. It was simple. While the Face squad fought the monsters, the others would leave the forest quickly. Milas demanded if they had no honor, but Tarek replied that the only thing that mattered here was survival. Dead if they had no honor, but Tarek replied that the only thing that mattered here was survival. The beast would eventually kill them all. It was only waiting for them to tire out before attacking. His plan was simple and efficient. The next day, the Face squad rode at the rear as usual. Then the Tarek squad bolted, abandoning them as the demonic beasts appeared. The captain realized they had been betrayed. Helmut, deep in thought, decided it was time to act. When the beasts swarmed in, the battle began, but the numbers were overwhelming. Watching his comrades struggle, Helmut thought only one thing: these people cannot die here. He told them to keep secret what they were about to witness. Then, drawing on his vis, he leapt into the fray, cutting down monsters from every side until not a single one remained standing. And when he cut down the last one, everyone was stunned. This guy was insanely strong. Helmut simply said that his body had recovered. Tanya realized what she had seen before was true, and even the captain was surprised, since not even he could manifest his viz like that. In any case, Helmut said he would stay with them until they left the forest. While they were tracking Tarek's men, it looked like they had run all night through the woods, but Helmut suddenly sensed something. There was a battle up ahead. At their current pace, it would take nearly an hour to reach it, so they hurried on to try to save those idiots. In the other group, they were barely managing to defeat the beasts when the leader showed up. Now, they were doomed. The blue-haired one told the other they should run, otherwise they would all die. If they fled now, all witnesses would disappear and their reputation would be safe. The two slipped away, shouting "disperse," while Old Mills paid the price for his decision as the beast started dragging everyone out of the carriage. At that moment, Helmut arrived, sending the monster flying with his sword. Earlier, the captain had told him to go on ahead and check the situation. Now that his vis was back, he could also defeat this monster. But as his blade cut across the creature, he realized this was the strongest enemy he'd faced since leaving the forest. He couldn't lower his guard. The two clashed fiercely until the monster began absorbing the energy of the dead around it. It would likely be even stronger than before. Helmut had to go all out and finish it before the squad arrived. The fight raged on from every side. When the monster leapt, Helmut recognized the attack pattern. It was the same as the serpent Nahos. He jumped as well and delivered a massive slash. By the time the others arrived, he had already laid waste to everything. Fortunately, Old Meals was still alive inside the carriage. When he woke, he thought he was in the afterlife and apologized, saying Tarek's men had threatened him. In the end, he was not dead, and the demonic beast had been defeated. Now it was time to discuss payment. They wanted 80% of the profit for everything that had happened. After all, they had saved Meals in the end. He agreed, while the captain asked what exactly they were transporting. Their client, it turned out, was the archmage Antiol, and the goods they were carrying originated from the Lumen Temple. As they knew, The temple's power was beyond imagination. The group that had defeated the Demon King thousands of years ago was no longer what it once was. They were now gathering sacrifices and power in the name of protection. Most kingdoms had submitted to them, yet they were unable to control that particular mage. In the midst of conflict, the mage had found an item in the temple and wanted to research it. If it became known that the Merchant Association had passed the item to him, the association would be destroyed since the temple was too powerful. They were doing it only because that mage had once saved their leader. They owed him this favor. Helmut asked if the mage was really that famous. There were even stories that he had nearly shattered one of the temple's divine barriers. Helmut wondered if a mage like that might be able to remove his seed. Sometime later, they finally left beast territory. The captain gave Helmut a pill to help restore his vis and thanked him for saving the squad. Without him, they would all be dead. The next day, they reached the marked area. The captain still didn't understand why the location was literally in the middle of nowhere. No village, no road, nothing. According to old Mills, that was exactly where they would load the goods for delivery to Antiol's home. Instead of explaining, Milas decided to show them with a necklace. He placed it in the middle of a tree, and everything began to exude energy. This was magic, and they were traveling through space. The captain was stunned. It was beyond imagination. Helmut asked whether it could be an illusion, but the temperature was dropping. They were crossing a great distance. Ahead, they finally saw someone, Archmage Antiol, welcoming the Merchant Association's guests. Seeing that everything had arrived intact, he thanked them and asked if there had been casualties. There were several traces of life force in the carriage. Old Meals said only a third of their members had made it, since they had fought a giant beast. Interested, Antiol asked where the corpse was. Meals replied that it had already been processed, but if he wanted to buy it, it was available. The mage offered 150,000 marks on the spot, shocking the group. It was a fortune. One of the men said he'd heard archmages possessed immense wealth. Antiol told them simply to unload the carriage. He wouldn't need it. Looking at him, Helmut sensed that, although this was a power different from the dark mage he had met, Antiol was very strong. When Antiol looked at Helmut, he remarked that mages could perceive truths unknown to others. Helmut warned him to watch himself. Antiol then raised a barrier spell that shut them off from the outside world, a gesture of respect for hidden truths. He vowed upon his mage's name. Chains of power emanated from him, the mage's oath, a promise that, if broken, would cause a great loss of mana. He told the special boy to ask what he wished to know. Seeing that Antiol was not some untrustworthy dark mage, Helmut decided to ask only one thing. Without hesitation, Antiol asked whether it was about the Seed of Darkness. It was. Helmut wanted to know how to remove it. Antiol answered frankly, it was impossible. The Seed of Darkness was directly tied to his life. It held the power of a demon that rarely took root in infants who should have died, reviving them through the seed itself. Therefore, the thing must live until the host's death. Helmut was shocked. He had expected an archmage to have a solution. But Antiol was a mage, not a god. And this was the first time he had seen someone actually controlling their seed. Normally, the seed demanded demonic energy from the host. The more one resisted, the more one's mind was consumed, until finally going mad and transforming into something akin to a demonic beast. Helmut's case was unique. In theory, he could suppress the seed's power by using mana or vis. Both powers required talent and time. Antiol found it fascinating that Helmut had trained his vis while feeding the seed the minimum demonic energy necessary to keep from going insane. He added that even priests would struggle to detect traces of the seed unless they examined Helmut's body directly. Even for him, an archmage, it was only visible because it had reacted to the massive amount of demonic energy present there. As things stood, Helmut's future did not look bright. He would grow very strong with time, if he could avoid drawing the temple's attention. But eventually, like all the others, the seed might devour him, and then his sword would lay waste to this world. That was the destiny of all who bore the seed. Helmut answered that it would not happen because he was human. Antiol laughed, explaining that just as humans proclaim destiny, they can also change it. He said he would watch the boy. If Helmut failed to overcome it, Antiol would have to stop him when the day came. After all that, Helmut received payment for the work he had done with the squad. He asked whether a bag found among the luggage was also his, since it didn't belong to any of the members. The bag held the items he had brought from the forest. Helmut thanked them. While the captain explained that he hadn't given it to him earlier because he had simply forgotten, he also thanked Helmut, calling him the hero of the mission. Finn came in all excited, talking about showing him the mercenary headquarters, but Helmut decided not to go. Tanya offered to let him keep using the squad's certificate, since he now had something more important to do. Helmet gathered his belongings and left while everyone bid him farewell. The captain told him that whenever he needed a squad, he just had to call on them at any time. Helmet thought to himself that part of his heart hurt, just like when he left Darien and Eliga behind. Now he faced the threat of demonic beasts once again, and the seed within him was absorbing more and more energy. Just like in the forest, the only way forward was to become so strong that not even the seed could control him. Elsewhere, someone muttered that they would never have taken the job if they had known it would be this dangerous. Still, what mattered was that they were alive and could rebuild Tarek without anyone knowing what had really happened. But then they heard familiar voices. It was the captain, Tanya, and the others passing through the door. The two became worried, realizing the others had survived. When Finn looked to the side, there was no one left at the table by the window. They worried, knowing they should have killed that squad personally. One of them was sure it was only a matter of time before their actions reached the guild. Thus, Tarek's group marched toward obscurity, but the bitter blue-haired one ordered them to move on. Since they were rank 2 mercenaries instead of starving, their only option was theft. At sunset, Helmet sat in a tavern, thinking he needed to find some clue about the pendant. For days, he had been wandering randomly through villages. He couldn't always count on finding good people like the squad, but at least the money he had earned from the captain was almost double what Darien had once left him. That was when he realized there was a letter tucked inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Darien's. Before his last breath, Darien had written a letter, saying that if Helmet was reading it, then his life had ended, and that Helmet had left the forest. Darien wrote that Helmet would likely struggle to adjust to the outside world after living so long in the forest, and that Darien himself had little time left, which was why he was worrying about him. To the point, if Helmet was traveling without a goal, he should go to Boden, to a place called Greta Academy, where children his age went. There, he could learn more about being human, since peasants and nobles were treated the same. Of course, he could not enroll alone. He was to find a man named Ethan Kudrum and show him the sword Darien had given him. Ethan would know he was Darien's disciple, and because of a vow between them, Ethan would help him. Finally, Darien wrote that the human world could be a dangerous place where strength alone could not solve everything. But since Helmut had survived such harsh training, Darien believed he would overcome this new test. He urged him to be careful. Seeing the trembling letters, Helmut realized Darien had barely had the strength to write. He already felt grateful, because now his path was set. Just then, the waiter arrived with all the food he had ordered, telling him the total was 15 marks. Helmut casually pulled out a coin from the bag, one worth 1,000 marks. The waiter was stunned, while Helmut told him he planned to sleep there, and that the coin should cover everything. At that moment, one drunken man glanced over. While Helmut was lost in thought about the money he had earned, the man approached, saying the kid must be rich. 2 more joined in, asking him to lend them 20,000 marks so they could drink. Helmut flatly refused. Irritated, they wanted a fight. And if it was a fight they wanted, it was a fight they got. Helmut easily defeated them. The drunkard asked who the hell he was, but Helmut only answered that he was a mercenary and ordered him to get lost. The frightened waiter warned him that he needed to leave town immediately. He had just earned the enmity of the Black Eagles, bandits who ruled the underworld and killed anyone for money. Helmut realized he had stumbled into something bigger than expected, and thought about luring them elsewhere. While the dazed waiter insisted he should flee, Helmut instructed him to say he had gone into the forest. He would be back, so the innkeeper should keep his room ready. That night, in an alley, the Black Eagles debated whether he would really do such a thing. Then one of them came running, saying he had discovered Helmut's whereabouts in the forest behind the inn. They decided to hunt him down, to prove that the Black Eagles were scarier than anything else. In the forest, Helmut thought back on what he had learned with the squad, that many humans acted like beasts, but others protected one another. Humans were complicated. He also remembered Darien's words. Problems could not always be solved by strength, but right now, strength was the only way he could deal with them. One thing he had realized was that humans who behaved like demonic beasts had to be treated as such, and since they all came armed, he had every right to send them straight to the grave, didn't he? Later, Helmut left, leaping from branch to branch, thinking that these men were weaker than Tanya. Either way, he decided he would move at sunrise. For now, he returned to the inn to rest a little. But at that moment, the seed began to react, and he collapsed to the ground, wondering why. After all, he hadn't killed demonic beasts, only humans. The fact that this had happened meant that killing people also made the seed grow. That was a serious problem. If others discovered the massacre he had committed, humans would hunt him down. Since he couldn't simply kill his opponents, he would have to avoid it as much as possible. That was why he needed to reach the academy quickly. Meanwhile, one of the ninja-like men reported that everyone was dead. The bearded man told them to stick to the plan. Soon after, Another mercenary appeared, those same rank 2s who had fled the battle and had their reputations destroyed. The bearded man said he appreciated strong people wanting to join, but entry now required conditions. He didn't doubt their abilities, but things here were different. They carried out many illegal jobs. If someone acted out of morality, it would be a problem. That was why he needed proof that they wouldn't. He gave them a task. The night before, 5 of his men had vanished. They had been killed by a single mercenary. Judging from the bodies, each had been killed in a single strike, and no trace of any weapon was found. The description of the killer was a boy of about 15, with black hair and black eyes. If they completed this job, they could join the Black Eagles. The blue-haired one immediately asked where he was. According to reports, he had been staying at an inn in a nearby village. Since not much time had passed, he couldn't be far. In another town, Helmut was thinking of taking a mission to move around without drawing attention. When he entered the guild, the receptionist greeted him and asked what brought him there. Naturally, he was there to accept a mission. Since he was registered with the mercenary guild, there was no problem. She asked what kind of mission he wanted. Helmut said the reward didn't matter. He just wanted something that would take him toward Boden. Since Boden was a major city, many people traveled there, so finding an escort or transport mission was easy. She showed him one, escorting a noble lady. But there was a condition. The mercenary had to fit the lady's ideal type. Helmut was perfect for it. After accepting, he stopped by a shop, remembering that the receptionist had told him to make a good impression. With his handsome face, he already had an advantage. Now he just needed proper clothes. In the shop, the mustached merchant eagerly displayed all kinds of garments. Helmut, calm as ever, asked the price. That particular piece cost 2,000 marks, while the mission reward was only 800, an absurd imbalance. Back at the guild, the receptionist was impressed by Helmut's new look, saying he looked stunning. Helmut simply replied, "I'm not handsome, I'm Helmut," while she slipped out that he was too handsome for his own good. As she said he was perfect for the mission, a man from House Zaringer arrived to check the mercenary they had hired. He introduced himself as Gilton, butler of the Zaringer family. He explained that escorting and transporting weren't so different, except that one protected a person instead of cargo. If it proved difficult, Helmut could just follow the knights, and they would even pay more when the mission was done. They went to the inn where the Marquis's daughter was staying. Gilton introduced him to a knight named Cedric, and then to the young lady herself. She was clinging to Lord Alia at the table. The butler presented Helmut as the newly hired mercenary, but the lady barely noticed him, giving all her attention to Alea. Alea insisted they depart soon, then excused himself to rest. Just seeing the man pass by, Helmut thought something was odd. The young lady followed Alea, while Helmut asked if he was also a mercenary. No, he was only a guest of the lady, and well known at Greta Academy. According to the butler, the young lady was heading there to take her entrance exams. With only 2 hours left, Helmut was told to prepare and fetch a horse from the stable. Once steady on horseback, Helmut remembered that the preparation hadn't gone smoothly. The horse had thrown a fit, nearly tossing him. Up ahead, the young lady called for Lord Alea to enter the carriage. Watching him, Helmut realized Alea seemed to be a mage, explaining why he had felt so strange since the beginning. But what kind of magic he used, or why he had cast a spell on himself, was still unknown. Inside the carriage, the lady asked if he was truly the best in class at magic. He answered yes. She admitted she was nervous for the exam. He reassured her, telling her everything would be fine. She kept trying to coax him into teaching her, but in the end, he told her he would find a specialist for admission tests and urged her to rest for the long journey. Meanwhile, among the masked ones, the spy reported everything, that Helmut had accepted a mission. The problem was that knights of a noble house were involved, which could complicate things. Still, they were told to eliminate him alone. That was the Black Eagle's philosophy. Their enemies had to be killed piece by piece. The blue-haired man promised that this would indeed be put into practice. Meanwhile, in the escort group, the lady was complaining about the poor quality of the inn where they stopped for the night. But in that region, there were only such inns. It would be just this once. In the forest, Helmut was training, thinking his vis was far stronger now compared to when he had lived in the forest. He wondered if he would manage to focus on his training at Greta Academy, and more importantly, if he could find clues about the seed. As night fell, he heard a noise. He investigated, only to find a bird, controlled by Lord Alea, who had also found Helmut suspicious. Alea had seen many skilled mercenaries, but rarely one so young at rank 3. Soon after, the young lady came pounding on Helmut's door, saying she knew he wasn't asleep. In the end, the maids dragged the excitable girl away. The next day, as they traveled, it was nearly lunchtime. They stopped the carriage near a lake to rest and eat. The mercenaries grumbled at the back, eating stale bread and filling their stomachs with water, while the lady enjoyed fine dishes. Helmut found himself missing Finn's cooking. Then he noticed something strange about the water. It tasted slightly sweet. Could it be poison? Everyone else drank it without noticing, but soon some began nodding off. Even the butler noticed the lady was mumbling in her sleep before dozing off himself. One by one, the servants collapsed. Helmut quietly poured his water away, realizing it was their scheme. When the attackers arrived, they were stunned to find him awake. Two of them recognized him. It was the mercenary from that transport mission. Helmut immediately called them traitors for abandoning their squad. They retorted that it didn't matter. Now he and the lady were their prey. The blue-haired one blocked an attack, but before things escalated further, Lord Alea appeared. He warned that if they didn't want to die, they had better lower their swords and leave. Noticing another figure still conscious, the blue-haired mercenary turned his blade toward him, demanding to know if he was the mage behind this. Alea dismissed him, telling him to shut up and clean up his own mess. Now, he said, he would have a little talk with that brat, clashing his swow. While the bearded man said the mage didn't need to move, since it would be a painless death, the mage replied that a silent mage was a dead mage. Meanwhile, Helmut was fighting through the forest with the blue-haired man. He thought himself lucky that the mage hadn't fallen asleep. The blue-haired mercenary swung a huge slash through the air, convinced he had already defeated Helmut. But behind the smoke, Helmut stood calm, saying this was only the beginning. He even thanked the man for following him there, since this would be his end, as he was not a worthy person. The mercenary snapped, enraged that Helmut was using Vis, and charged forward. Helmut dodged, leapt high, and came down, striking him hard in the face. The traitor crashed to the ground, battered, asking how a brat could use Vis. Helmut struck him once more, telling him he would let him live. The man begged him to kill him instead, saying it was better than humiliation. But Helmut said nothing was more humiliating than abandoning his comrades, so he would live with that shame. The man laughed hysterically in the distance as Helmut remembered the mage who had stayed behind. The mage had already overwhelmed the other candidates, summoning more spells. The bearded leader rushed in, only to be blasted in the face with magic and hurled against the rocks. The mage restrained the others with a binding spell, telling them not to move. During the chaos, the bearded man slipped away, broken and shaken, wondering when everything had gone so wrong. But then he saw Helmut walking past without a scratch, proof that he had defeated the blue-haired one. When he reached the carriage, the mage tossed him a rope, ordering him to bind the prisoners, who would be sent to jail upon reaching the city. Helmut remembered what Darien had told him, that there was a place where those who did evil were sent. He regretted letting the others escape. The mage asked how Helmut hadn't collapsed. Helmut replied that he hadn't drunk the lake water. Suddenly, the mage fired a blast near Helmut's head. Helmut asked how the mage hadn't fallen asleep either, since he had seen him drink. The mage explained that he had purified the water before consuming it. Helmut asked if it was because of the magic surrounding his body. The mage was surprised that he could sense it, but Helmut clarified he could only feel it and hadn't been curious enough to question it. Afterward, the butler expressed gratitude, saying he owed the mage. The mage dismissed it, saying he had only done his duty and that mercenary had helped a lot as well. The butler promised a greater reward, but at that moment the young lady threw herself onto Alea, claiming it was destiny since he had saved her. She declared she would repay him with her life and do anything for him, but Alea silenced her, reminding her that he was already engaged and would marry after graduating from the academy. The girl broke down in tears, while the knights decided to move on. Before long, they reached the city without further incident. There, the butler handed over the reward, 10,000 marks, as a gift of gratitude for saving them. Helmut thanked the mage for his help and left. For now, it was time to enter the academy. Inside the city, Helmut quickly noticed how different it was from the villages he had visited. Large, bustling, overwhelming. Soon he reached Greta Academy, where he was to meet Ethan Kudrow. At the front desk, he told the attendant he was looking for that man, the swordsmanship instructor. Helmut gave his name, and the woman led him to the office. She asked him to wait a moment and cast a spell on the door, while Helmut thought about finally meeting the man Darien had mentioned. Inside, Ethan admitted he had never heard of him, and demanded to know why he was there. Helmut could already tell he was not as strong as Darien, but of all the sword masters he had seen, Ethan was the strongest. Helmut showed him his sword, saying he would understand if he looked closely. At first glance, it seemed poorly made, but upon focus, it was clear this was one of the finest blades. Only one man could have crafted it, Darien de Pert. Shocked, Ethan asked if Darien was still alive. Helmut told him he had died recently. Ethan clutched his head, lamenting that it had been 20 years since Darien vanished. He had sworn to repay Darien for saving his life. Since Helmut held that sword, he must be Darien's last apprentice. Ethan asked why he had come. Helmut explained that he wished to join Greta Academy. Ethan understood why Darien had sent him. Perhaps the boy would need a guardian. Judging by his condition, Helmet was about 14. They would register him as 15 and put him through the transfer exam. But if anyone learned he had been Darien's disciple, he would be admitted instantly. Helmet realized something troubling. Darien had been in the root forest, but to the outside world he had simply disappeared. Not even old acquaintances knew where he had gone. That meant someone had deliberately sent him there, hiding it from everyone. If they discovered Darien's apprentice was alive in the human world, Helmet could be forced back and lose his chance to resist the seed of darkness. He decided he could not reveal everything yet. When the time came, he would tell the truth. Ethan accepted, saying Helmet could ask him for anything he needed. He would handle the paperwork for the transfer exam. For now, he wanted to test Helmet's skills. They went to the underground training hall. Ethan gave him a wooden sword and pointed to a tree of white vine, the strongest kind. If Helmet could cut it, he would be extraordinary. Helmet prepared, swung, and split it cleanly in two. If he kept that level, his admission was guaranteed. Now all that remained was passing the written exam. Helmet, however, had no idea what a written exam even was. The disappointment began. His results were worse than a 5-year-old's. With 10 days left before the exam, he had to improve quickly. But as an instructor, Ethan was forbidden from tutoring candidates. According to Ethan, Alea had enrolled at the top of his class with perfect scores. Since he was so gifted, Helmet decided to ask him for help. Ethan was baffled. Helmet went to Alea and asked him to be his tutor. Alea flatly refused, saying he would never teach a stupid swordsman. Helmet insisted that he needed to pass, and everyone said Alea was the best. He wasn't asking for free. He would pay. Alea laughed, asking how much money a mercenary could possibly have. Helmet simply asked how much he wanted. Furious, Alea demanded 100,000 marks up front, no installments. Helmet agreed immediately, saying he would prepare for tomorrow. Alea was stunned that he had accepted such a ridiculous price. They agreed to meet there the next day. As Helmet left, a green-haired student remarked how fascinating it was that Alea had a friend. The following morning, Helmet returned, ready to study. Alea's companion was shocked. He had actually come, with the full 100,000 marks in hand. Alea told him to wait. Helmet suspected he might run off with the money, but Alea returned, and they began studying in the library. As Helmet focused, Alea realized the boy was more troublesome than he seemed. His learning ability was remarkable. He asked Helmet if he had spent his whole life in a forest. Helmet sensed from the beginning that Alea was not a normal person, so he had to be cautious. He asked why. Alea explained it was because Helmet's focus and memory were excellent, but his knowledge of society was non-existent. His answers had been disastrously poor. Since he was being taught by the academy's top student, Helmet had no choice but to pass. If not, he would tarnish Alea's honor. That night, they were still studying in the library. If a classmate stole something from you, what would you do? Alea asked. I'd steal it back, Helmet answered. And so Alea kept explaining, until Helmet realized that humans really were that difficult. After a solid 2 weeks had passed, we were in the academy library, where the girls were already swooning over Lord Alea, while rumors spread that he was secretly tutoring someone. When Helmet arrived, he immediately asked if he had done well on the written exam, since the practicals would probably be no problem. Alea headed off, wishing him luck on the upcoming tests, and Helmet thanked him. Now only the practical exam remained. Now we're in the fencing arts department in the waiting room. It was packed with people chatting while they waited. A blonde guy walked up to Helmet, introduced himself as the second son of the Rugal family, and asked Helmet's name. Helmet promptly asked why the blonde was talking to him. The boy claimed he was just trying to make friends. Helmet said, Helmet. The other asked for his surname to know what family he belonged to, but Helmet had none. The only family name he had ever seen was on his pendant, Margaret Irene. Even so, he answered that he had no family. The blonde's face darkened, so he was a commoner. Everyone started snickering at him until a knight told the worms to keep their voices down. In 5 minutes, they would explain how the test would work. As the blonde walked off, he sneered that Helmet should lower his head before his betters. Helmet, as usual, remained calm and unmoved. They explained the exam would be done in groups and split into 2 stages. As soon as that was said, Helmet felt everyone's eyes on him. This place was nothing like the root forest. Whether monsters or humans, everyone stood somewhere on a pyramid. In the human world, being strong wasn't enough. Family mattered too. The instructor called the last group into the hall. Inside, the first test was to cut through a trunk of blackwood using a wooden sword. They had 5 minutes to do it. Helmet thought this was about as easy as it gets. He gathered vis and struck once, splitting the trunk down the middle. The examiner was stunned. Even he, a supervisor, had needed several blows to chop through it. Helmet had done it in a single clean cut. Back in the room, the obnoxious blonde started needling him again, but it was time to explain the second stage. A duel observed by the instructors for 8 minutes. Opponents would be assigned at random, and candidates could pass whether they won or lost. The aim was evaluation. The blonde shouted that it was unfair, since whoever drew the commoner would pass for free. Helmet, irritated, was about to throw down when the gong sounded. The instructor called number 29, Helmet, and number 8, Andro. Inside the arena, both candidates stood ready. One instructor asked Ethan if this was the candidate he had recommended. Since Ethan had never recommended anyone before, the boy must be talented. The rules were set, 8 minutes total in 2 rounds of 4. The goal wasn't victory, but demonstration of skill. Begin. Helmet's opponent had heard he was a commoner. Even if he had cut the tree, he must not have had proper training. He was going to get beaten to the floor, just like that. The instructor was at a loss. Number 8 was already incapacitated, furious at having lost to a commoner. The staff were impressed by Helmet's ability. The gap between him and the other candidates was enormous, but if things kept going like this, it would be hard to gauge everyone else's level. Ethan suggested that Helmet, instead of finishing his opponent, should duel as if he were teaching him fencing. He told Andro to forget status and family. He would benefit from facing someone far ahead of him. Andro agreed, insisting he had his pride and wouldn't fall so easily. The result was a series of controlled clashes, with Helmet calmly pointing out every mistake, just as Darien had done with him long ago. It was like watching a teacher instruct a student. Ethan remembered how he had once nearly died to a beast and been saved by Darien. Now he saw the same presence in Helmet. A week later in Boden, Helmet went to the mercenary guild. The clerk asked if he wanted to place a request, but he said he was there to take one. The clerk admitted he had first assumed Helmet the heartthrob belonged to some renowned family. When choosing a job, Helmet recalled Ethan's reaction to him paying Aaliyah 100,000 marks, and he started learning about finances. At the guild, he wanted a job he could complete by next month with a high reward. The clerk found one with a strange location, Greta Academy. The pamphlet reported a ghost appearing at the academy, seen at night scaring people. The request was to identify and eliminate the ghost. While he was walking through the academy, a green-haired boy called him Aaliyah's pupil. It was the first time the idol of the magic department had been seen with anyone, so their relationship had become gossip. The boy said he was a slightly different sort of mage and summoned a zippy little light spirit that shot toward Helmet, who promptly punched straight through it. The boy laughed. It was a light spirit, rotten. It couldn't hurt anyone. Even if it could, you couldn't block it physically. Spirits had no bodies, and only a few mages could control them. The green-haired boy was one of them, Cian, the only elemental mage at Greta Academy. "Okay, nice to meet you," Helmet said, and moved on, explaining he was in the middle of a job. Since it was an on-campus request, Cian asked if it was the Academy's ghost. He was very interested in the rumor and offered to help. In the end, the two of them headed out at night with poor Ratine as their lantern. Cian said that unless a spirit was summoned with dark magic, it wasn't particularly dangerous. Helmet suggested they split up to search more efficiently, but Cian refused and stuck with him. After checking another room, Cian suddenly startled. There was someone walking up ahead. Helmet's hand went to his sword, until the ghost stepped into view. It was Aaliyah asking what they were doing there. They explained the guild request about the Academy ghost. As it happened, Aaliyah had received the same request. Cian was thrilled to hunt ghosts together. In a nearby room, they used an illusion spell that mapped the Academy's entire structure. Aaliyah pointed out that every reported sighting had one thing in common: the fencing department. It couldn't be a mage behind it. The timing and incantation requirements didn't line up. Helmet added that ghosts couldn't be struck with physical attacks. He had talked with Ethan about it beforehand and learned a few things. For once, Helmet realized he was having a civilized conversation. Before, he had always been scolded by Alaga or had his ear tugged by Darien. The thing was, the three of them had different kinds of knowledge, but together, they could piece together the answer, little by little. That was how a conversation should work, right? With that in mind, Aaliyah told Helmet to try using his sword with Vis on the ghost if they encountered it. After a while, Cian went off to rest. Helmet asked Aaliyah where he could find a spirit, but as an elemental mage, Aaliyah couldn't simply track one down. Thinking about it, someone else had already realized something and had gone chasing after a spirit. The two of them ran after Cian, and Helmet asked if he had known what a spirit was from the beginning. That was exactly the case. Using Cian to search was the only way Aaliyah had thought of to locate the thing. Up ahead, Aaliyah used a detection spell that showed tracks on the ground, leading straight to the training field of the fencing department. Aaliyah explained that spirits sought quiet places to hide and build their bases. Helmet remembered Ethan's training grounds right next door, a place almost no one visited. Perfectly quiet. They went in, and Alea confirmed he felt something there. Helmut slyly asked if he had really received a guild request. In truth, Alea disliked the fact that Cian was the Academy's only elemental mage. He wanted to capture this spirit and study it. He cast a silent spell to erase his presence and asked Helmut to help him set a trap. Then, finally, the Academy ghost appeared. Alea immediately tried to attack. With his sealing spell on the field, the ghost couldn't move freely. Helmut's job was to weaken it. Helmut drew his sword, charged it with vis, and sliced the creature in two. It really could be cut with vis, or maybe not since it reformed, angrier than before. Just then, another spell cut across the field. Cian arrived, demanding to know what they were doing. This was a dark spirit, he said, and since it was self-aware, they needed a delicate approach. Alea scoffed, asking how they could capture a spirit that was out of control, while Cian accused him of wanting to experiment on an innocent creature. Alea complained that Cian had refused to cooperate with his research on spirits, but that was because Alea's experiments were frightening. Now the plan was for Alea to maintain the seal while Helmut kept it occupied. Cian would attempt to calm it. With several layers of magic circles, Cian and Alea worked together. The spirit lunged. Helmut's slash intercepted it, but the spirit bolted. Helmut chased it, leaping high, his blade flashing down, nearly striking its face. At the last instant, Cian cast his spell, shrinking the furious monster into a tiny, pouty-headed creature. The next day, they brought it to the mercenary guild, reporting the mission complete. Cian rambled about why the ghost had appeared at the academy, boasting about being the only elemental mage there. The attendant told them to return in a few days, to be sure the ghost wouldn't reappear. Helmut had made his first friendships at the academy, though Alea avoided even shaking hands. Later, Helmut met Ethan. His assigned dormitory was on the 3rd floor, Unit 301, since all students lived on campus. When Helmut showed his papers downstairs, the man looked uneasy. Upstairs, someone was grumbling, swearing never to make friends again, but now stuck with 2 troublesome ones, all because of a damned crow perched on the stairs. On the 3rd floor, Helmut opened the door. Behind it stood Alea, complaining as usual. But Alea was not a man at all. Rather a woman in disguise. Could this be the magic Helmut had sensed around him before? Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, the 2 failed assassins were making a scene with the guards until a mysterious figure appeared, mocking them for failing to kill a child. The blue-haired man attacked, but his head was severed instantly. The bearded one asked who it was, but he too fell. The figure muttered that they had stained the name of the Blackhawks, then turned its attention to the terrified guards. Back at the academy, Alea was furious, unwilling to face Helmut. But when the key turned, there it was, the new room. Helmut thought the dorm was simpler than the Kudrow mansion, but compared to the forest, it was paradise. Since leaving the forest, he had allied with and aided the Pace mercenaries, and now he was enrolled in Greta Academy. He was finally on the right path. From now on, he would focus on becoming stronger, but then he sensed something, instinctively reaching for his sword, only to remember he had left it aside. Behind him stood Alea, nearly exploding his head. Alea snapped that he too had been assigned to room 301. Helmut was confused, until he noticed there were 2 beds. Alea stormed off to the director's office, ordering Helmut not to touch a thing until he returned, or else you'll regret it. Director Liam Weiss sat calmly sipping coffee when Alea burst in, demanding how he could let such a thing happen. She was head of the magic department. She had the right to a private room. The sly director, already anticipating this, apologized smoothly. The dorms were under renovation, leaving fewer rooms available. Alea fumed, reminding him of his promise. He knew why she needed privacy. If it was discovered she was a woman, chaos would follow. The director told her to be careful. She had an archmage's magic, and no one in the fencing department would notice. Still, she was furious. He knew exactly whom she was up against. He replied seriously that giving her a private room now would look like excessive privilege. The only solution was to assign her a friend as a roommate until next semester. To Alea's dismay, that friend was Helmut. The director insisted she had taught him, fought alongside him, and even admitted they had become friends. Alea protested she had only done so for money. Still, the director said it was his job to encourage bonds. If she endured this, next semester the room would be hers alone. As Alea left, he thought how close things had come. Helmut seemed like a good kid, but the situation was dangerous. Back in the dorm, Alea, cheeks red, asked if he really wanted to share the room. Helmut had no choice. This semester, she would have to share. She suggested he live in the city and be brought daily by magic, but the director would never allow that. She muttered that it would be annoying, asking if he was sure. Helmut thought for a moment. He much preferred Alea to the muscleheads of the fencing department. Alea was left flustered, regretting ever helping him during the exam. Later, as carriages rolled past outside, Helmut carried his belongings in. Aaliyah told him to look. This curtain divided the room. Everything beyond it was Aaliyah's space. She had even set an alarm spell on it. Helmut was not to cross under any circumstance. She laid down the rules. No noise, no stink, keep the bathroom clean, no guests, and if he needed anything, he was to knock on the curtain. As she returned to her side, Helmut quietly said he hoped the two of them could get along. As they walked around the academy, a group of students whispered that it was true. A commoner had passed the transfer exam, and Professor Ethan was his guardian. Sabbath declared he would personally take care of him, since commoners had no right to stand on equal ground with nobles. Tomorrow was fencing class, and they planned to teach that street rat a lesson. Later, Helmut finally changed clothes, thinking how comfortable they felt. He planned to head to the training hall, but on the way, he ran into Marimohead, our friend Cian. Shocked, Cian asked if Helmut was in room 301. Helmut, with his usual expression, asked if that was a problem. Cian couldn't understand it. Alea had always lived alone as head of the magic department, yet somehow agreed to this arrangement. Cian muttered that it must be tough to live with someone so constantly stressed, then asked if Helmut had fencing class that day. Since it was his first, Cian gave him some advice. Stay away from the mad dog of the department. Helmut asked if the department raised dogs, but it was only a nickname. This mad dog was a second-year student called Asuka. Last year, everyone who messed with Asuka got beaten senseless. One student even quit after losing an ear. The academy had only given Asuka a suspension because of his talent. That's why no one touched him now. Cian told Helmut to pay attention in class, then added that he lived in room 303, so if Aaliyah tried to kill Helmut, he should run upstairs. Later at the fencing field, the instructor called the second years into 4 lines. He asked how their vacations had been, since this was the first class of the semester, and announced basic training. I hope you spent your break in mommy's lap. Now give me 20 laps around the field. Helmut ran easily, wondering if 20 laps wasn't too little for a warm-up. A boy nicknamed Lettucehead was furious about running next to a commoner. He decided to make Helmut meet the academy floor. His first kick did nothing. Confused, he tried again, until Helmut, tired of the nonsense, slapped him straight to the ground, face first, and kept running calmly. The other boy swore revenge. After the laps, the students lay exhausted. The same boy confronted Helmut, accusing him of knocking him down, though he had started the trouble himself. Enraged, he threatened Helmut, saying he was protected inside the academy, but outside no one would save him, since he didn't know his place. Poor fool. He had no idea how strong Helmut already was. Another blonde stepped in, telling Aaron to save his energy. Their chance for payback would come. Helmut reflected that humans, though weak, clung to pride in their status they hadn't even earned themselves. He wondered if he should teach these rotten nobles a lesson. Just then, someone appeared above, asking if they were talking about him. Aaron asked who he was. The newcomer didn't know them either, but had overheard talk about a commoner and wanted to know if it involved him. The blonde snapped, calling him insolent and saying he didn't have to tolerate commoners. But the blue-haired mad dog sneered provocatively, while his cronies held him back in mock restraint. Asuka said he'd see how long they could endure him. Helmut remembered Cian's warning, don't mess with the mad dog of the department. Sure enough, it was Asuka causing the ruckus. The professor shouted for those whose names were called to step forward and take wooden swords. He called Asuka first and demanded why he was late. Asuka claimed he'd been meeting with Professor Patricia, but she was on break that day. If you're going to lie, at least try harder, the instructor barked, punishing him with 30 laps. Helmut thought Asuka must have a terrible reputation. The professor warned the class to train seriously, no fooling around. Helmut picked up a sword, swinging it powerfully in different directions. He thought back to Cian's words, that the first class wouldn't be special. It was simple, and Helmut wondered if it would get harder later. At that moment, Asuka called to him. Asuka asked if Helmut wasn't going to thank him, because thanks to him, the earlier fight had stopped. But Helmut hadn't asked for help. Asuka clasped his hand, claiming he was a fellow commoner and hoped they'd get along. Helmut sensed strange energy in his hand, ignored it, and listened as Asuka added that he hated people who begged for help all the time, then walked away muttering to himself. Helmut said almost nothing. He thought maybe picking fights left a strong impression. Alea told him that wasn't true, that fools who relied on status could be dealt with simply by showing strength. Helmut recalled Cian's warning not to start fights on the first day. Alea explained that depended on the fight. Provoking others to attack left a bad impression, but the opposite could be good. Better to wait for the dual class. Helmut noticed Alea watching him closely. Alea said he was lucky. After all, he'd had private lessons. Helmut thought deeply, asking if being the top student meant you could attack however you liked without restraint. He was thinking about that strange student from his class. Soon Asuka was with the clique of nobles. The blonde mocked him, saying he'd made another commoner friend, but soon Asuka would be their obedient dog. Asuka smacked him in the neck, saying he was just getting too excited, then asked if he wanted obedience now. At Greta Academy, there's no discrimination when it comes to learning opportunities, Asuka said coldly. But over time, a belief had taken root that nobles should harass commoners. Though not official, it always happened in secret. Asuka earned his nickname Mad Dog for his menacing presence. He turned it on the nobles, mocking them for doing nothing but watching. One of them admitted Asuka lived up to the name, but since returning from suspension, he had to walk the line. Another misstep would mean suspension again, so the noble demanded he throw a punch, saying if he obeyed, his life would be ruined, but at least he'd become their dog. It was clear who the coward was. Asuka's friends jeered that even the Mad Dog was afraid of the kennel. Furious, Asuka was about to smash the boy's face when someone struck both of them twice on the head. "Are you here to become thugs?" It was Professor Patricia. Asuka tried to say the noble had started it, but she struck him again, scolding him for always relying on violence. Then she turned to Sabbath, the noble, and told him he was wrong too. He should choose his opponents by skill, not status. Since it was nearly time for the next class, she dismissed the students and called Asuka to come with her. After they left, she struck his back again, warning him he was heading for trouble. She had only protected him now because he was a senior. But if it happened again, she couldn't shield him. He mustn't throw away his chances for childish fights. She added that she'd heard the new commoner had made it through the first class without issue. Asuka should be kind to him. They were in the same situation. Realizing she meant Helmet, Asuka muttered that he had no intention of allying with anyone. Somehow that boy always managed just fine on his own. He asked whether Sabbath was going to do anything about it. Another noble grumbled that it was bad to let people like that keep popping up. A third tossed him a towel and told him to be nice, for now. The boys complained, but they didn't understand. He didn't mean be friends. The teacher said that one of the students hadn't arrived yet, and another student in the back said the one missing was Helmet, adding that he had told him the location of the class. She ordered someone to go find Helmet until he himself finally arrived. The teacher asked why he was late, but the truth was he didn't know the location had been changed. While the others said everyone had been informed, she asked if Helmut had received the notice or not. The nobles were already laughing at him, and the teacher herself realized he hadn't received it, but he spoke very properly. "I didn't receive it, I'm sorry." And since she didn't do anything about it, we would have to be the ones to put those nobles in their place with our own hands. Then the class began, because today was the start of the basic course to train their endurance, a crucial trait for swordsmen. Each one would receive an almond and had to balance it on the tip of their sword without dropping it. Whoever managed to do it for 30 minutes would be excused from class. She called Helmet to help her distribute the almonds. Asuka had thought he would be more rebellious, but he was just acting like a commoner scared of the nobles, and that's why they were different. But when Helmet went to hand one to the guy who usually gave the announcements, "My friend, brace yourself," because he went in with force. The boy didn't even have time to react before taking a blow to the stomach, while nobody understood what had just happened. Even the almond he threw got smashed against the boy's belly, who screamed in pain, and Helmet stood there apologizing because it had been too strong. Imagine if it hadn't been, right? That's when Asuka realized this guy was anything but normal. After that, the others kept training, and the boy who got hit took off his shirt because his belly had turned purple. And now that poor bastard wants revenge on Helmet, as if he hadn't deserved it, right? Then he asked if Sabbath wasn't going to do anything about it. Another student complained that it wasn't good for people like that to keep showing up, and someone else threw a towel at them, telling them to be kind to the two of them, for now. The boys complained, but they didn't understand. He didn't mean be friends. Soon they would learn a lesson, so they should behave until then. They asked what Sabbath was planning. Everyone was fuming as the next class was about to begin. Later, Marimo showed up, saying he'd heard the news. Helmet had earned disciplinary action in just 2 days. Helmet smiled and said that was right. Another student couldn't understand why he was so cheerful. Aaliyah scolded Cian for barging into someone else's room. Cian insisted he only wanted to see his friend Helmet, but Aaliyah had refused. After more bickering, the annoyed Aaliyah threw them both out, and they had to talk in the hall. Cian apologized. He didn't know Aaliyah was inside. Helmet was still oddly smiling, maybe for the first time in this story, since he usually wore a stern face. Cian asked what had happened. Helmet said he was simply proud. Even if he couldn't hurl the almond with all his strength, at least no one had been seriously hurt. He was happy to handle things the way humans did. Like Aaliyah said, he could only resolve things with his own strength. For now, he would train more and settle it. Marimo asked if he had plans for the weekend and invited him to the city. Helmut said he'd actually have to visit the professor's house to talk. Cian got excited and asked to come to the Kudrow estate too. Building connections was good. Helmut thought a moment and agreed. Cian ran off, saying they'd meet on the weekend, while Helmut wasn't sure what to make of it. That night, in a certain building, a hooded man arrived. Another said they had received a request. He complained it was a commission from some noble brats, but since they paid, they'd take it. He added that some people had tried to impersonate their faction. He checked the documents and asked Chromo if he recognized any names. No one did. They would shelve that request while he dealt with another. Even so, someone should keep an eye on it. He had a bad feeling about the name Helmut. Time passed. The weekend finally arrived at the academy. Students used their break to visit the city, leaving the campus eerily silent. Helmut was ready to go when Marimo asked if he wasn't taking anything, since they'd be gone for 2 days. Helmut mused that in the forest, to improve survival chances, you traveled with as little as possible. Cian asked if Aaliyah was still in the room. Obvious enough, since Aaliyah rarely went to the city on breaks and almost never visited family. "I'm not a stalker," Cian insisted. Helmut, expression blank, asked if Cian wanted him to ask Aaliyah something. Cian said never mind. He'd changed his mind. In the city, Asuka thought it was much calmer. Those filthy nobles couldn't mess with him here. Even if they tried, he would never bow his head. He found himself thinking of Helmut, how the boy remained calm whenever Asuka started to lose control. He couldn't deny that what happened in class had felt good to watch. Then he glanced back, uneasy. He wandered through the market, eating a skewer. Someone really was tailing him. He stopped in an alley and demanded to know what they wanted and who had sent them. When he saw more men gathering, he could guess who it was. Since his sword was at the smith's, he'd have to break these guys with his bare hands. He suddenly shouted, "Professor Allen's here!" The men flinched in panic. Asuka dashed forward, shoulder-checked the first, vaulted over him, and sprinted away. Unluckily, more men were waiting at the other end. Surrounded, he snarled at the idiots to stop posturing and start fighting. Meanwhile, at the Kudrow estate, Ethan thanked the boys for coming. Shin beamed, calling the place beautiful, and Ethan told him to just call him Professor. He was happy. He'd never expected Helmut to have such a polite friend. Cian said that since they were on break, they could visit the city. Helmut mentioned training, and Kudrow said that was a great idea. So Helmut would not be escaping a trip to town that evening with Cian. Cian joked, asking how Helmut could leave a house like this to sleep in a dorm. He even wiped away a fake tear, wondering if Aaliyah nagged him so much with spirit summoning that there was no time left to nag Helmut. At least Cian was getting better at summoning spirits. Just then, someone staggered up behind them. Asuka, battered and bloody. Shin jumped with a yelp as Asuka begged for help. 3 men with swords showed up at the end of the street. One glance at the emblem on their cloaks was enough. Helmut recognized the Blackhawks. Helmut stepped forward. He would talk to them. Cian asked what he planned to do. Helmut recalled that the Blackhawks were mercenaries who killed their targets for a price. Not long ago, he had defeated members of that faction. He had hoped he wouldn't have to deal with them after enrolling at the academy. But this was a chance to gather information. One thug asked the captain what to do. They couldn't leave witnesses. They'd kill all 3, starting with the swordsman. Helmut moved. One man's arm flew off. He kicked the second's hand and sent his sword spinning into the sky. Before it landed, Helmut punched the rest to the ground. By the time the blade clattered back down, everyone was out cold. Everyone except Helmut. Even Asuka was stunned by the sheer speed. Helmut even stopped to check since the dark seed hadn't reacted, so it was clear that if he didn't kill, there would be no problem with the seed. Marimo asked who those guys were. Helmut said they were the Blackhawks, stomping on one's hand as he explained they were a mercenary group that killed people for money. Asuka wanted to know who had sent them, though he already had an idea. But that would be hard since they'd been trained not to talk. He muttered they just had to find out how many bones needed to be broken before one of them would open his mouth. Marimo asked if he was crazy, planning to torture the guys. The other didn't understand what was going on in Helmut's head either, but Cian said the only thing they could do now was call the guards. Not even Asuka believed he had said that. Still, attacking an academy student was a serious crime, so Cian left, saying it wouldn't take long, and warned them not to do anything stupid. The moment he turned away, Helmut pressed down on the man's hand again, demanding to know what they knew about him. Since the man stayed silent, he decided to let it go. Later, back at the academy, a woman said they would speak with the headmaster tomorrow and asked if Asuka wanted to go to the infirmary. Since he refused, the 3 of them walked on. Thanks to first aid, he'd be healed in no time. Marimo suggested finding magical healing. but they didn't have money for that. Then he had a brilliant idea and dragged them to Alea's room. Alea, furious, asked why that idiot was dressed like a beggar. When he was about to argue, Marimo jumped in front, saying Asuka was hurt and needed healing magic. That made Alea even angrier, dragged to this nonsense in the middle of the night. But since Helmut politely asked, Alea had no choice but to do it. Of course, he warned it wouldn't be free. Helmut would pay since he had made the request. He asked Helmut what he'd do if he healed his friend. Without thinking, Helmut answered, "Anything I can do." Alea agreed, smiling far too happily, while Helmut regretted saying it. Alea healed Asuka, who put his shirt back on and said Helmut seemed rough but had skill. Then he left, while Alea kept grumbling about that rude idiot. Marimo said it was good to help others anyway. Helmut insisted he didn't need anyone's help, but Marimo told him he was underestimating human relationships. Alone, there was only so far one could go. That applied to Alea as well, who had ended up befriending two antisocial types. Helmut actually thought about this whole human relationships thing. The next morning, word spread that Asuka had been attacked the night before, but the suspects were arrested after also targeting Helmut and Marimo. By the morning, though, the headmaster learned they had already escaped. Asuka demanded how that made sense. From what he'd heard, there had been an infiltrator among the guards. Marimo asked how the academy would handle it. The headmaster said they would not sit idly by. They were interrogating everyone in the department. Afterward, Asuka muttered they should have tortured them, just like Helmut suggested, since they had escaped too easily. Helmut only replied, "If you want to fight, don't put my name in it. That's your problem to solve. But if the problem comes to me, then I'll deal with it." Marimo went back to class while Helmut headed to train. After a while, he asked why Asuka was still following him. Asuka said Helmut was skilled and asked if he didn't get angry when nobles picked on him. Helmut simply said he wasn't going to act like Asuka, but Asuka already was acting without realizing it. Helmut told him flatly that he had a rotten personality and shouldn't keep starting fights. Asuka mocked him, calling him Daddy's obedient boy. Helmut shot back angrily that he wasn't patient enough to let people say whatever they wanted about him, including Asuka. That shut Asuka up. Helmut opened the door to Professor Kudrao's private training hall, where he had permission to practice. Asuka asked to train with him, but Helmut shut the door in his face, saying he'd just get in the way. Elsewhere, the nobles were grumbling about being interrogated over the Blackhawks' business. One said they'd get away with it since the academy couldn't directly touch them. He asked what Sabbath planned, since his useless scheme had backfired on them. Sabbath was furious, gnawing on his fingers, swearing that the Academy's investigation only meant their battle against the commoners was just beginning. The next day, the instructor announced they would begin duel classes the following week. Helmut was glad. He could settle matters in a duel. She added there was something important first: a written test the day after tomorrow. The grade would count heavily, so they should study the assigned books. Later, Alea was furious that Helmut hadn't bought his books. He asked if no one had explained it to him. Helmut remembered Kudrao had told him, but he'd forgotten after everything that happened on the way back from the mansion. Alea told him to get permission to leave the academy. The only problem was, he had no money. Alea complained until he remembered Helmut had paid him 100,000 marks, but Helmut had left the money with Kudrao, and there was no time to go back. He needed a way to earn cash quickly. Alea asked if he was seriously trying to borrow money. Helmut promised he'd repay it by the weekend. Alea finally agreed to fetch the money, but insisted he would go with Helmut into town, since he couldn't trust him not to get into trouble with it. When they left, Marimo tagged along, saying he wanted to look at books. Then Asuka joined too, making an excuse to leave the academy. Alea grumbled that Helmut was carrying two useless burdens. At the bookstore, one boy was thrilled just to smell the books, while Alea quickly grabbed all of Helmut's required texts. Looking inside, even the intermediate volume was just basic material. Then Asuka handed him an extra book, not required, but said exams from that professor usually covered outside subjects, so it was the best one he could find. The others were surprised. Alea explained that Asuka had a reputation as the mad dog, so it was impressive. Asuka asked for a new book of his own, but Alea told him to buy it with his own money. The total came to 2,000 marks. The clerk suddenly asked if that was Alea. He tried to deny it, slipping away, while the others teased him for an autograph. But it was true. He had entered the academy with record scores. Seeing this, Helmut understood a little more about those human relationships. Alea said the trip was unnecessary. Helmut asked if he'd bought any books. Of course, Alea had already bought them earlier. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about knowledge. Helmut asked if books could really teach him anything. Alea explained that knowledge varied. Many books just laid down the rules, and if you thought you knew everything, one day you'd fall flat. He warned Helmut to take care of those books, because he wouldn't replace them if lost. But the next day, by bad luck, Helmut was furious. His books and Asuka's had vanished from the locker. He nearly crushed the walls just by clenching his fists. Because someone's getting beaten up later today, isn't that right? Later, in class, the instructor announced the start of duel practice. They would be paired off, and it was forbidden to use vis. The point was to gain experience fighting other people. Once you found your opponent, he shouted, begin the duel. At that moment, someone called out Sabbath's name. It was Asuka, challenging him to a duel. Sabbath sneered, but Asuka asked if he was afraid, because men settle their differences with swords. Sabbath said he already had a partner, but even the professor reminded them that they must duel against different people. Sabbath snapped that he wouldn't fight a mere commoner, but Asuka laughed, asking if he couldn't handle it. His friends exchanged uneasy looks. Meanwhile, someone stepped up saying he wanted in as well. It was Helmet with his sword, saying that even if they all tried, the result would be the same. Moving in a pack was the habit of the weak. Sabbath was getting angry, but his friend put a hand on his shoulder, saying he'd wipe that smug look off Helmet's face after giving him a proper beating. Earlier, before class, they had sat down to discuss their plan. Sabbath said they should provoke the two and then accept the challenge. One of them said he didn't know Helmet's strength, but it would be impossible for him to beat Asuka. Sabbath said he would use vis. His friends asked how. Vis was forbidden. So he came up with a plan. He would claim he'd only used it to defend himself from violent attacks. At worst, he'd get a warning. But if they crippled Asuka, he'd be expelled from the department. In other words, a risk worth taking. Then another added a condition. He wanted to face Helmet's crow because he still wanted revenge for the day of the run. And that's how it was set. They could barely wait for the day of battle. When the day came, Asuka and Sabbath stood face to face. Sabbath grinned, saying he'd put that commoner in his place. But in the middle of the fight, everyone stopped to watch. Sabbath himself was sweating. He didn't know what was happening. Asuka still hadn't thrown the first strike. One of Sabbath's cronies thought Sabbath had underestimated Asuka. When Asuka held a sword, he was like a hunting hound. He stood still, staring down his opponent, searching for a single opening. He himself had tried to warn them about this, but the other cronies hadn't listened. Sabbath snorted, and Asuka moved, blindingly fast, straight at him. Sabbath's mind raced. Right side, he'll attack from the right. He raised his sword to block, only for Asuka's blade to be coming right down the center of the noble's skull. Asuka dropped Sabbath flat on his back. No one wanted to look. Sabbath was crushed. Asuka said he'd never get tired of pounding nobles into the dirt. Sabbath tried to stand, but his shoulder wouldn't respond. Even with one arm out of commission, he got up, thinking to play his vis card. In the same second, Asuka slashed his back and sent him flying. After that, Sabbath could do nothing. He just took the blows while trying to say he surrendered. Now he truly surrendered. Asuka finished with a thrust to the gut so he'd remember it for the rest of his life. If he said, "I surrender," Asuka would only hit harder. Now we switched to Helmet's fight. The noble asked why he was making such a scary face. Was he worried about his friends? Helmet just stood there and said he was worried about him. Before dessert, we cut back to Sabbath, taking another beating and dropping like a rag doll. He looked around, but everyone stared with contempt. He grabbed his sword and said he wouldn't let it end like this. Right then, he used vis to finish it quickly. But as he lunged, Asuka simply turned, flipped, and cut him from every angle. Since Sabbath had already broken the rules, no one would care if Asuka broke them too. When Asuka raised his blade for the final blow, everyone gaped as the instructor stepped in to stop the fight. He said the duel was canceled and ordered both to his office. Asuka protested that Sabbath had broken the rules and that if he hadn't dodged, he would have been badly hurt. The instructor replied that failing to respect your opponent was also against the rules and asked why the professor was shielding a brat like Sabbath. He ordered Sabbath carried to the infirmary. Another student ran up, asking if the instructor could stop those two as well. But before their duel, we flashed back to the previous day. Sabbath's two lackeys said Asuka wouldn't fall as easily as he thought. Another said, "Just look around." Sabbath was already done. Even without evidence, everyone knew he'd orchestrated that thing in town. They might as well forget about Sabbath. This stained a noble's honor. In that moment, Helmet was downright terrifying. One strike, and the noble's sword snapped in half. In the same instant, Helmet's expression didn't even change as he struck the boy square in the throat, dropping him and stealing his breath. Helmet crouched over him, cold as ice, and asked if he thought being a noble would protect him outside the academy, because Helmet could snap his neck whenever he pleased. The noble began to cry before this monster. When Helmet stepped on his hand, the seed reacted. He grabbed the noble and hurled him upward. The instructor came running, shouting that the duel was canceled. But the look Helmet gave him was so murderous, the instructor's knees trembled. He stood there, speechless. Helmet finally stopped and dumped the punk on the floor. The instructor ordered Aaron taken to the infirmary and Helmet to his office. The other said what he really wanted was to beat Helmet senseless and told him not to lose this historic duel. So before the fight, Helmet asked if he was the one who messed with his locker. The noble scoffed. Who else would it be? Thinking Helmet was full of openings. He lunged, aiming at Helmet's legs. There, he said he would give both of them a chance to apologize if they had anything to say. Since neither spoke, he said he'd expected as much from Asuka, but not from Helmet. Helmet, calm, replied that he hadn't broken any rules. But before coming there, the instructor had stopped by the infirmary and seen that Aaron's throat was torn and all the fingers in his hand were broken. If they had been any later, he might never have spoken again, and he probably would never hold a sword. Asuka shouted that they'd hired the Blackhawks to kill them, so it would be best if those nobles never held swords again. The instructor smacked him on the head, asking if they realized they had gone too far. Helmet said he didn't understand why they were blaming them. Aaron was weak and still had the nerve to keep cursing them. What Helmet did was give him a warning, to make him understand you can't mess with just anyone. Asuka added they had stolen the books from his locker. The noble's instructor said that was against the spirit of the department. Helmet asked whether insulting, stealing from, and belittling commoners was the spirit of the department then. The instructor said he wasn't taking anyone's side, but in the end, Helmet had solved a problem the faculty hadn't. Then he drew his sword and slashed in their direction, even cutting into the ceiling, saying they were simply the strongest hunting the weak. It wouldn't be right for the instructor to use his strength to crush the two of them. Just as a noble shouldn't look down on a commoner, the strong shouldn't crush the weak. What they had done was exactly what nobles always did. Helmet asked what they should have done instead. The instructor turned and said this was the teacher's fault for not intervening and letting it get this far. But the academy could not be ruled by the law of the strong. Its purpose was to build bonds. Nobles and commoners, strong and weak, all equal. He said both were excellent students, but they were now forbidden to duel other students, only each other. That perked Asuka up. The instructor handed them a document, because the punishment wouldn't end there. They wouldn't leave until they wrote 50 apology letters. That night fell, and Asuka's hand was red and blistered. He couldn't bear to write another line. He stormed out, cursing the instructor, while Helmet thought he didn't regret it, but he had made a mistake. He had lost control of the seed for a second. Asuka turned and asked if Helmet's hand hurt too. Helmet only grumbled that he couldn't train because of it. Asuka asked if he ever rested, then said Helmet was pretty skilled for such a lazy bones. He asked to train with him. Helmet answered no, no, and no. Meanwhile, the instructor looked on from above. He had always known Helmet was talented, but the killing intent he'd shown then had felt more like demonic energy. He prayed the boy wouldn't lose himself to the shadows. Then he looked up at the slice Helmet had carved into the ceiling and sighed. They'd dock that from his pay. Later that night, in a warehouse, everyone knelt before their boss. He said they had lost a Boden spy trying to push them out of there. The spiky-haired man apologized, saying they had brought shame and failure. The one with the eye patch said a second-year student should never have fought like that, but the boss told them to stop. He hadn't called them there to scold them. In fact, they deserved a reward for coming back alive. He told Chromo to speak, because among the students they had faced, there was one with black hair and a crow-like face. They confirmed it was him, and Chromo said that boy was Helmet, a former mercenary who had killed 5 of their men with nothing but a tree branch. The boss said hiding in the academy was a clever move. They had thought it might become a problem, but they couldn't just let him run free like this. So he gave them a new mission: deliver a report to their superiors, and afterward they could take a vacation. But when the group left, excited, the boss quietly ordered another to get rid of them after the mission was completed, because he might be meeting with that certain person. That night, Helmet sneaked back into his room, only for Aaliyah to say he'd arrived late. Helmet apologized for the noise, but Aaliyah had already heard. Rumors around the academy said Helmet had beaten a student so badly that he would never fight again. Helmet grumbled that he hadn't been able to train because of it, while Aaliyah asked if he wasn't at least glad. Helmet apologized for losing the books. At that, Aaliyah pulled back the curtain angrily, asking if he hadn't understood what he'd said before. He hadn't told him that expecting his books to be stolen, so it wasn't his fault. Helmet only thanked him, while Aaliyah shut the curtain again, cheeks red. The next day, Helmet went to lift weights, but his training hall was being cleaned, so he had to use the shared one. Since the duel, things had changed. Students had started talking to him, not because they wanted to, but out of fear. Still, that was better than he'd expected. Soon after, someone came saying Professor Kudraw was looking for him. Helmet arrived, and Kudraw said he had heard about the incident during class. Helmet immediately apologized, admitting part of the blame was his, but Kudraw said that wasn't why he had called him. He told him those boys would soon be punished. In fact, the 2 students would be expelled from the academy. Not even nobles were forgiven once they were caught dealing with the Black Hawks. If Helmet understood where he had gone wrong in the last incident, then he needed to take up his sword and keep following his own path. To lighten the mood, Kudrow joked about being troublesome in his youth. Then he told Helmut to come to the mansion with his friends on the weekend. He had even bought new books. Helmut asked why there were 2 stacks, and Kudrow said one was for Asuka. Helmut asked why he should deliver them, while the professor thought, "Make friends, my boy." Later, the green-haired one said he had come at just the right time. Helmut took the chance to give Asuka his books, explaining that Kudrow had bought new ones. Then Marimo asked if Helmut had free time on the weekend. So one evening, Marimo was all excited, saying this was the best bar of all because they had to celebrate justice prevailing. After all, Asuka was paying for everything. The chatterbox kept running his mouth, while Helmut remembered Alea saying he wouldn't go out with those idiots. Helmut took a sip, thinking it was terrible. They kept saying he had become a star in the department. Asuka laughed. Who's going to mess with someone who crippled a noble for life? Marimo asked why he was making such a crow face. Helmut said it made sense to be hated, but he didn't understand why the 2 wanted to go out with him. Marimo, drunk, said that wasn't hard to answer. From the moment they met, he was sure fun things would happen around Helmut. Asuka asked why he was so mean to him, trying to get Marimo to agree. But Marimo had already collapsed onto the table, red-faced, after only 1 drink. Asuka laughed at him, while Helmut thought he still didn't really understand these things. After all the drinking, they tried to head back, Marimo barely able to walk. Across the way, Helmut saw a crowd, and thought he spotted Alea among them. Earlier that day, Alea had been searching the library for books. Not finding what he wanted, he thought about going to Boden. He remembered how Helmut had invited him to go out, but he had refused. Maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad idea to accept. Later, it happened again. Women crowded around him, offering anything he wanted. Just then, he spotted the crow waving to him and rushed over, saying he had arranged to go out with him today, while Helmut had no idea what he was talking about. Asuka complained, while the women asked how Alea could go out with those swordplay brutes. Things began to sour. One girl noticed Asuka's hair and asked if it was really him. Asuka, irritated, dared them to finish the sentence so he could show them what was good for their health. At least that worked. The girls all scattered. Alea hit Helmut, telling the drunks not to get near him. He kept pestering Helmut and asked what had happened to Marimo. Helmut explained he had passed out after a single cup. Alea pulled out a potion, saying it was an antidote carried by the magic department. They gave it to Marimo, and he woke immediately. Seeing Alea there, he blushed, since, in the end, Alea had come. Should I kill him now or later? Helmut thought. At that moment, he asked Alea if he wanted to visit Kudrow's mansion tomorrow. Alea asked first, "Those 2 aren't coming, right?" Helmut said it would be just the 2 of them, and so Alea agreed, asking what time. The next day, Helmut thought he understood, but maybe he didn't, because Alea woke up furious, saying it was a team battle, and the goal was to defeat those 2 blockheads. He declared, "I don't accept defeat, understand?" While Helmut was more lost than ever. And that's where the next chapter begins. In the bedroom, Alea asked if Helmut was preparing for the exams. Helmut said he was kind of preparing, since he didn't need to worry much, except for a few subjects where he was struggling, like continental history and magic. That had happened because he transferred late and couldn't take proper classes. Helmut said that to pass, all he needed was to show his skills, but that was a trap, because even if his practical abilities scored 150 points, the system capped grades at 100. So even if he ranked among the best, he still needed good marks in general subjects to break ties. Helmut said he'd worry about that later. Alea warned that if he left it like that dog Asuka would surpass him. Helmut realized that right away. Alea looked serious and said that if Helmut wanted to pay a fair price, he could help. And so the 2 of them ended up in the library. Helmut asked what they were going to do. Alea said it was just a special gift for the exams. When they entered, Marimo and Asuka were already there. Alea asked what the 2 were doing together. Marimo stammered something about classrooms, but he really wanted to know why those 2 were together. Angry, Asuka insisted he was studying. Marimo said it was a shame, but asked the 2 to go to another room because they wanted to study. Helmut whispered that something was fishy here. Alea smiled, saying, "It's really a shame, so let's not disturb anyone studying." Marimo said, "Thank you very much." But Alea added he had a better idea. A simple one. Helmut and Asuka would stay there, and they would go to the next room. The 2 looked awkward, while Alea asked if they were hiding something. In the end, Asuka was worried about losing his spot as the top student to Helmut, so he asked Sheehan for tutoring. He said last exam he'd fallen short by just a single point. And of course, that was only because Alea had helped Helmut. But now, Asuka didn't want to fall behind in theory classes. The fool asked if Alea was going to help Helmut again. Sharp-tongued as ever, Alea said of course, he wouldn't be there otherwise. Down below, Marimo said that since they'd found out, they could make a bet. The loser would have to run 100 laps around the field without using magic. Which is why Helmut's studying now wasn't about grades. It was about Aaliyah's pride. Thus began the saga of studying. Night fell and rain poured while the two studied in the library, with Aaliyah furious that Helmut had the nerve to get everything wrong. Aaliyah demanded what kind of written answer that was. First question, what's the difference between witches and mages? Helmut's answer, witches are evil and mages aren't. I know because I've met one. Helmut said he just wrote what he thought, but Aaliyah barked that it had to be based on standard theory. The goofs showed up to gawk too. They were shocked, asking if Helmut had never handled questions like that. His transfer exam had been all multiple choice. Aaliyah slammed the table, furious. He wasn't about to let his pupil be beaten by two fools. From then on, relentless training began, full of arguments and food. Late at night, after the others had left, Helmut asked why Aaliyah was so obsessed with staying on top. Helmut thought that one day Aaliyah would become an archmage and be able to see the seed inside him. At some point, he would have to keep his distance. Aaliyah stepped closer and asked if Helmut understood. He flipped his hair toward Helmut, who wasn't paying attention to what he was saying. When they both realized it, they were practically pressed together. Aaliyah turned away, saying he wouldn't explain twice, face flushed bright red as he left. Meanwhile, Helmut decided he'd been using his head too much. The next day, Helmut was training in the hall when a classmate asked if he'd made a bet with Asuka. Since they were the two best in the department, rumors spread fast. He took up his sword and said he was betting on Helmut. This was Andro. Since transfer exam day, they'd become comrades, and Helmut had even helped his swordsmanship. Andro said it would be a challenge, but he definitely wouldn't lose. Andro said he was dying to see Asuka lose, while the very specter stood behind them. He told the guy to shove off and asked about today's class, duels against the first years. He grumbled. He'd wanted to fight Helmut. Andro said this year had a lot of talent. There was even a very strong girl in the sword department, skilled with a blade and very beautiful. Helmut pondered as the girl sheathed her sword. Soon all the students gathered, and Andro pointed out the freshman he'd mentioned. She flicked her hair and looked like the female version of Helmut. The guys said she oozed nobility. People noticed the resemblance right away and glanced at Helmut, whispering that they might be related, even if Helmut knew nothing about it. Among the freshmen, they looked down their noses, refusing to call commoners upperclassmen, snickering that they were adorable. Asuka snapped at them to shut up unless they wanted to meet the dog. After that, the instructor announced duels between first and second years. She began calling names. First up, Charlotte. Everyone buzzed with excitement as Helmut thought about speaking to her, but his opponent turned out to be Asuka. Second years groaned. Of all people, it had to be him. He complained to the instructor, but the matchups were based on ability. There was no choice. They headed to the field. Charlotte told him not to hold back just because she was a woman. She added that Helmut would be dueling Joffrey, the giant-looking guy. Just from his presence, he clearly wouldn't lose easily to a second year. The instructor started the first bout. Asuka thought her stance was better than expected. He asked why she joined the department. Obviously to get stronger, she said, and wasn't in the mood to chat. Asuka lunged and sliced, sending her skidding back. Everyone gaped as her hands trembled. She'd heard the rumors, so this would be a valuable lesson. He teased that he was just warming up. When she set herself to get serious, the fight intensified. He noticed she could block. She clearly knew how to use a sword. He rushed in, aiming at her neck, but she slipped back at the last second. He pressed, blades crossing, asking if she was trying to force a draw. He knocked her away, saying he hated the arrogant and those who didn't respect themselves. And was your confidence at the start that fake? If you're not willing, get out of the sword department. She shouted that she didn't care about class. She only wanted to learn. Thanks to him, she realized her vision had been narrow. Then she called him to come again. Asuka went all in. They traded cuts, and he nearly took one to the face. They kept at it around the arena, one attacking, the other defending. When she thought she'd caught him, Asuka was already above her, telling her to relax her shoulders. This would hurt. He came down beside her, blade at the ready, saying it was a shame her opponent was him. The instructor declared Asuka the winner. In the end, he said she'd surprised him once she changed her posture, while the girl groaned, "Help! You're too heavy." He got off, and she thanked him for the advice. The jealous ones in back called him a pervert. As she left, she glanced at Helmut, and he looked back. Outside the arena, the big guy growled how she dared lose to a commoner. Charlotte fired back, telling him to change that thinking or end up flat on the ground. In that moment, he stood face to face with Helmut. Before the duel, Helmut remembered a talk with Andro, who'd asked what he'd do if he met a much stronger opponent. The big guy eyed him, thinking this must be the rumored commoner, but he didn't look like much. It was the same gaze people gave their inferiors. The instructor called from behind, telling Helmut to go easy. Everyone remembered what happened in his last duel. The match began. The big guy charged instantly. Helmut blocked, but another strike came from the other side. He had to leap, blades colliding. The guy boasted he'd have shattered Helmet's sword if he hadn't dodged, but Helmet, crow-faced, was calm. He'd fought far stronger opponents. The battle continued. He slipped past everything, because no matter how strong your attack is, it means nothing if it doesn't land. Spectators muttered the fight was boring. The big guy called Helmet a mere commoner and said there was a gap he'd never overcome. Helmet thought it was the dumbest provocation he'd ever heard. Then the guy sneered that Helmet's teacher must have been awful. That was the last straw. Helmet's face hardened. The instructor told them to focus, but Helmet exhaled and said that from here on, it wouldn't be easy. He sprang forward and slashed the man's leg. In the same beat, he came around from behind. The big guy leapt, but Helmet still landed the blow. The arrogant one shouted that the attacks were weak, only to find himself on his knees. His leg couldn't bear the weight. While Helmet recalled what had been said about experiences, that being beaten by a commoner would be a good lesson for him, the noble tried to strike, but Helmet slid beneath his legs with a sword sweep, knocking him flat on the ground. He fell face first, trying to get up, but Helmet knocked his sword away, telling him, "I may be a new student, but I don't recommend speaking ill of someone else's teacher." At that moment, the instructor shouted for them to stop, but Helmet still landed a strike on the noble's neck. Everyone around was left gaping as victory was declared for Helmet, the noble crusher. After those fights, the rest of the duels went smoothly. The freshmen realized the vast difference in power, while the others saw they needed far more training. Later, Helmet ran into Charlotte in a courtyard puddle. She startled as she greeted him, while he didn't even know what to say. Then he remembered the name engraved on the pendant, Margaret Irene. But even then, he remained deep in thought while Charlotte herself didn't know what to do. She grew nervous under his gaze. This was the upperclassman who had just destroyed Joffrey. In the end, he told her that he had seen her abilities, and that she certainly had a bright future ahead. He asked if she knew his name, but there wasn't a soul in the department who didn't know their rising legend. She said she wanted to fight him someday, and since he agreed, she thanked him, saying she would look forward to it. At that moment, Asuka appeared, asking if they knew each other. They explained it was just a chance encounter, and Charlotte left, saying it had been a pleasure. Asuka then asked if he was hitting on the freshman, but Helmet just replied that he wasn't a womanizer like him. Later that night, Helmet wondered if he was disturbing Aaliyah. Aaliyah, perched on the window ledge, said no, but after all those years spent with Darien, he couldn't shake a sense of danger. Aaliyah closed his book and said he wanted to ask something. He had heard that a first-year girl had invited Helmet on a date, and he wanted to know if it was true. Seeing Helmet's reaction confirmed it, though Helmet insisted it wasn't, explaining that she only wanted to spar with him in the next class. He added that he would never lie to Aaliyah. Aaliyah reopened his book, saying he would believe him, and added that Helmet was his closest companion in the entire academy. Then he warned him to be careful, never to trust any girl who approached, because all of them only wanted to use Helmet to get closer to Aaliyah. In other words, Aaliyah was just protecting her own interests. Helmet was left baffled, while Aaliyah continued his strange warning. Helmet said he understood, asking if he wanted him to stay away from Charlotte. Aaliyah, flustered, shouted that wasn't it, but the crow-faced Helmet calmly said that if Aaliyah truly suspected Charlotte, he would keep his distance. Aaliyah blushed, turning away, saying he only meant for Helmet to stay alert. The next day in the library, everyone sat in tense silence, staring at Aaliyah. Finally, he announced that Helmet had at last given a proper answer. Everyone leapt with joy, relieved he had survived the hellish lessons. Still, Aaliyah snapped that the answer wasn't perfect, so there was no reason to celebrate. They were only just beginning. Marimo drew their attention, saying that with exams approaching, he had picked a special place to study, somewhere they could review and enjoy waffles. Asuka asked who does that, but Marimo insisted he couldn't survive without a snack. Just the thought of warm waffles had Aaliyah drooling, and he admitted it wouldn't hurt to take a break. Asuka asked if the place would even be open. Marimo bragged about Boden's bustling night scene, but when they arrived, it was closed. Marimo bawled that he'd been dying to visit, while Aaliyah told him to stop whining and find somewhere else. Marimo suggested a toast shop instead, but Aaliyah shoved him forward to quit crying and keep moving. That one, at least, was open. Inside, Asuka balked at the price of the sandwiches. Marimo asked if he wasn't ordering anything, but Asuka explained that his family only gave him enough for tuition, nothing more. Marimo teased that he'd win a scholarship for being suspended, which earned him a furious grab. Aaliyah lectured that a mage should always be aware of everything, so as not to ruin things. Marimo complained that Aaliyah was far too sensitive to spiritual magic. By then, Helmut had already chosen his meal. When the food arrived, his sandwich was enormous, shocking everyone. Even Asuka laughed, asking if he planned to take it home. Actually, it was a specialty challenge sandwich reserved for sword department students. Just then, Charlotte and Joffrey appeared, saying it was quite the coincidence. At least now, the strong guy showed Helmut some respect. Charlotte explained they came because of the sword department's sandwich challenge. Joffrey had challenged her. Asuka asked if he wasn't ashamed of challenging a girl, while Charlotte demanded if he was underestimating her. Marimo tried to steal a bite of Helmut's sandwich, but Helmut slapped his hand away, declaring he would also join the challenge. Charlotte smiled, saying it must be fate to meet again here. Aaliyah stood, asking if he had seen her somewhere before, while his friends didn't understand a thing. The next day at the academy, Helmut dueled Charlotte under the professor's watchful eyes. They clashed blades, Helmut driving her back. He struck ferociously, aiming for her neck, but she narrowly ducked. She tried a low counter, but Helmut kicked her sword away. With her hand aching, she surrendered. The instructor thanked them for the duel demonstration, and Helmut left, recalling the previous day's events. Aaliyah asked if Charlotte had known him before, but she replied that she only recognized him by sight, since he was the famed senior of the magic department. She even glanced at Helmut with flushed cheeks, unsure of what had just happened. Marimo complained that he realized something. As long as Aaliyah was around, none of them would ever get girlfriends. Helmut thought back to Aaliyah's warning. Judging by her reaction, maybe he had been right. So he decided it was best to pull back a little and focus on getting stronger, strong enough that no one could cause problems for him. Later, Asuka sprawled in a chair, muttering that he only had to make it through half a semester without suspension. Helmut startled him, asking if he really thought he could manage. Asuka said he was just thinking out loud, then asked how the duel went. If it had taken long, it must have been tough. Helmut admitted it ended far too quickly. He only stretched it out because the professors told him not to finish so fast. Still, Asuka muttered that if Helmut didn't want to disappoint Aaliyah, he'd better prepare for the written exam. Right then, Aaliyah appeared, agreeing and asking if tomorrow's test was the theory of magic, since they should review together. Asuka asked where Marimo was, probably buried in his books with exams so close. They started arguing again, while Aaliyah ordered Helmut not to waste time and get back to studying. Helmut even asked why Aaliyah looked so worried. He thought it wouldn't be so bad to run 100 laps, but Aaliyah said he hated losing bets, so Helmut had better study hard. Aaliyah also scolded Asuka for being a distraction, shooing him out, and so Helmut's studying continued. Then the professor announced the exam. 2 hours, beginning now. Helmut looked at the first question. By accident, you have received the power of darkness. If undoing it would kill you, what would you do in this situation? After the test ended, the halls buzzed as students left. In the library, Aaliyah asked how it went. Helmut said it wasn't too bad. Most of the questions matched what Aaliyah had said. The only special one was about the power of darkness. Aaliyah asked what Helmut had answered. Helmut, with a dark expression, said he would accept the power and live, trying to find a way to control it. Aaliyah replied that it wasn't a bad answer. At least the professor wouldn't think so. Then he asked what Aaliyah himself would have written. Aaliyah said he would have gone to the temple in search of answers, but in the end, his response would have been similar to Helmut's, even if it meant becoming an enemy of the temple in the process. Because the Lumen Temple is always blocking the forces of darkness, if he revealed his powers, he would be hunted. So he told Helmut not to mention this to other people, because it could be dangerous. And he thought to himself, this is the same situation he lives in. Later, it was grade announcement day. At the academy, grades are posted on the bulletin board in the central plaza, making students compete for the top scores. Helmut was there in the crowd, looking at the board. In the magic department, there was no surprise. Aaliyah in first, Marimo in second. Then he looked to the side and saw him, defeated, saying it was impossible. He asked what on earth Aaliyah had done this time, because even though spiritual theory was a new subject, he got a perfect score. But for Aaliyah, 3 months is more than enough to master a subject. While he stood there crushed, the girls flocked around Aaliyah. Next, they went to see the winner of the sword department. In fact, Helmut had beaten Asuka by a single point. Marimo shouted that it was impossible, while Aaliyah smiled and said that in the end, Helmut had pulled it off. Asuka was mad about losing by 1 point, though losing first place to Helmut was at least somewhat acceptable. Still, he told Helmut not to relax. He'd see him next semester. At that moment, Marimo popped up behind him, calling him a traitor, because now he had to fulfill the bet they'd made. He even pleaded, "Have mercy! If he ran 100 laps, he'd die." But Helmut said 100 laps wouldn't kill anyone. Aaliyah smiled, saying he didn't find that unfair at all. Time to burn off that midnight snack belly. And so he collapsed on the ground, and later he was running circles around the field. The next day, the sword students were training when one of them said they'd have a forest camping class next week. Everyone was surprised, asking if he'd ever camped before. The redhead started spooking another student, saying it's important to bring a shovel, sleeping bags, and to be careful. There are lots of poisonous mosquitoes. Asuka griped that there was nothing interesting about it. He'd slept out on the road plenty of times. But Helmut calmly said they could burn incense and dung to keep mosquitoes away. Then Asuka invited Helmut to go shopping with him over the weekend. When they got to the city, doubt set in. He no longer knew what else they needed to buy, and Marimo had followed them again. Helmut asked if he had recovered from the lapse, and Marimo, suspicious, said, "Recovery magic works miracles." But that day, Helmut realized he'd used some spell to make a shadow spirit help with the punishment. Asuka clapped his hands and said first they'd get something to repel insects. Up front, they checked incense candles. Helmut thought it might be better to just accept the bugs. Then they went to pick up a lamp with low light so as not to attract predators. Asuka was impressed. Helmut thought of everything. He asked if it might fall in the middle of the night and start a fire, while Marimo said they could bring a fire scroll. Asuka asked if someone couldn't die because of that. In the end, he still tried to convince them to buy it. Helmut himself thought this felt more like prepping for a picnic. Helmut stepped away to look around. He left thinking he wasn't thrilled about the idea of camping, and the Black Falcons probably wouldn't attack at an academy site full of instructors. Ahead, he saw someone spinning something on a stick and shouted that this was Boden's most talked about dessert. People gathered to buy it, while Helmut thought it looked like a cloud. The person who bought one turned and asked if it wasn't amazing, and spoke to Helmut because they were in the same magic theory class. He wondered who this weirdo was, and she introduced herself as Teresa, a third-year student in the magic department. He remembered Alea's warning not to trust women, so he immediately said he was already with someone. Teresa insisted, but he turned away and said if she was so interested in Alea, she should go talk to him. She said to relax. She was interested in him. Just then, Alea appeared and asked what Helmut was doing there. Teresa said it was a coincidence to meet him. Alea flicked his hair and the girl flushed at a loss for words, so Alea hauled Helmut away. Then he said, "I warned you," telling him not to listen to girls' chatter and to be firmer in his decisions. Farther on, Alea asked where Asuka and Marimo were. Time to regroup. Helmut walked on, wondering if Alea liked or hated being pestered. Ahead, they found the two clowns, and Alea was disappointed with all of it. After that, Asuka said he was prepared so camping wouldn't be a problem, while Marimo asked if they hadn't spent too much money. At that moment, Helmut suddenly turned. He sensed a presence approaching. He kept walking as a masked shadow appeared in the dark, because his peaceful life at the academy was nearing its end. Now a dark room appeared, a candle melting down. Several hooded figures knelt. One thanked them for their hard work and introduced himself as the branch commander, Anton. He tried to speak, sweating, while the open doorway showed only smoke. Everyone around felt something coursing through their bodies, and a man walked past them all. Up front, he told them to keep talking and not stop to gawk. "Yes," came the answer. He thought this man was one of the faction's finest. Hawk-eyed killer, Fascio, the clown. As he had said before, they were having trouble handling a target, and he handed over the intel. The man looked it over. A rank 2 mercenary with the Pace group and also a second year at Greta Academy. He even questioned whether the academy would teach that boy anything. The commander said he was at a level where he didn't need to enter the academy. He probably enrolled to hide. He added that the boy was sponsored by Ethan Kudrow, a noble. The clown asked if they'd discovered anything about his past. Unfortunately, nothing. The only info they had was that he joined the Pace mercenaries during a mission and started working with them. The clown said, "We don't know when he was born, who his master was, or even who he is. This is the first time I've seen someone so mysterious." Anton asked if they might have tangled with the wrong person, but the man stabbed the paper with his finger and said, "There's no one the Black Falcons can't reach. Dead men vanish as if they never existed." He said they could leave it to him. He'd take care of the boy. This time he would have to put in real effort for the hunt. Afterward, the sky shone and horses stirred at the academy. Someone grabbed a bottle, saying it was a 32-year Marinée, a hard-to-find drink. He said he'd take it to share with the instructors, while a student pleaded, "Please, I saved up so much to bring one of those." But he said field classes aren't picnics. They had warned them. A student complained, telling him to look at that other guy. In back, Asuka said he was bringing only the essentials. The instructor scolded him to bring only what he needed. Otherwise, the horse wouldn't handle it. He grumbled, while Helmut watched from afar. He thought, it's a Monday morning, and today the academy's camping classes begin. Time passed as students rode over the mountains. Helmut thought it had been a while since he'd left Boden. Fresh air was indeed good. Asuka said that thanks to his noble sponsor, he'd gotten a good horse, and asked what breed it was. Helmut didn't know, and said Asuka's horse looked good too. Asuka gave up on that and asked the horse's name. Helmut wondered, do horses need names? Asuka called him Heartless. He said swordsmen and horses are partners who'll be together. so you should name them. Helmet said it was kind of hard, but you just say whatever comes to mind when you look at it. He looked at the purple-maned horse and said Asuka's name. Asuka got mad, that it was weird to name a horse after him. Helmet asked why it was weird, and they started bickering, saying he looked like a horse. Later that night, the instructor said they would stop for a while so they could leave their baggage on the horses' saddles. Asuka thought a full day had passed already, so how much farther until they reached the campsite? Helmet was listening because from what he'd heard, on the first day there would be a barbecue, on the second a hunting competition, and finally, on the third day, a group activity. But he thought it was better to stay alert in the middle of the forest at night. At that moment, Asuka asked Helmet where his horse was, and he looked startled because the horse had disappeared from his side. Looking closely, the rope had been cut by something sharp. He thought it was impossible. When could that have happened? But the important thing was how he hadn't noticed that someone cut the rope and led the horse away. Then Asuka pointed, telling him to look. The horse was behind the trees. Seeing this, Helmet asked to borrow his sword for a moment. He walked forward with the sword ready for any danger, but when he got close to the horse, nothing happened. There was no one in the area. At that moment, he felt something strange. When he looked down, he almost stepped into a hunting trap. Helmet didn't understand how that had appeared without him noticing. This couldn't just be coincidence. Something was happening because he felt the pressure of being hunted, but he smiled, saying that this hunter had chosen the wrong target, and he was going to have some fun. He called out, saying that since the horse's hair was white, he'd call him Snowy, and tried to bring him closer. Of course, since he'd just chosen the name, the horse didn't recognize it. As Helmet approached, he thought it didn't matter who was behind this. If they got in his way, they'd be eliminated, but he hoped at least the opponent would be interesting to fight. Later, the camp was shown from afar, and the instructor shouted that before preparing for dinner, he would announce the groups. From now until the last day of camp, they would be divided into teams to help one another. The leaders would each receive a communication sphere to contact the instructors if there was trouble. Helmet picked one up, looking at it, while Asuka told him a leader couldn't be distracted like that. Their group was behind them with a lot of new faces. Helmet himself noted there were many strangers, and some already seemed eager to start trouble with him. Another stepped forward, saying they should take the chance to introduce themselves. He started by saying his name was Andro. On the other side were Mitchell, Basil, Wesley, and Dino. Helmet asked, "And the red-haired one?" He grumbled that his name was James, and that they'd met before. Helmet replied mysteriously that yes, he remembered. After that, Helmet told them to prepare dinner first, because he needed to talk to the instructor. Asuka asked what it was, and he explained. When he went to get his horse, he had found a hunting trap. He said such traps were forbidden in this area, so he'd report it. Since that was the case, Asuka said he'd go along, while the others glared, thinking he was just trying to avoid dinner duty. Later, under a dark, starry sky, the instructor asked if he had really seen a trap in that area. She asked if he was sure, and of course, he had almost stepped on it. But since there was no sign of it now, she said she'd warn the others to be careful. Asuka asked if this was the right spot, but looking closely, Helmet saw the grass was pressed down. Someone had removed it before he returned, meaning they were being watched all along. Helmet thought of something Alaga had once taught him, how humans can be creative when hunting stronger prey. The persistence of wearing down a target until it was exhausted and fell, that was one of humanity's greatest strengths. But if they thought they could defeat him this way, they were in for disappointment. Walking on, he thought there was nothing on this mountain that could truly threaten him. When they returned, one of them asked why they had taken so long, since he'd had to prepare the meat. Then they showed the plate of meat, burned so black it looked like charcoal. Everyone thought someone would die if they ate it. A while later, delicious meat was being served. Everyone was impressed because this time Asuka had to roast it so they wouldn't be eating charcoal. They joked that plebeians really were different, while he asked if that was supposed to be a compliment. Then one of them told the others to look at what he'd brought. He pulled out a bottle of wine, and they asked how he managed it. The rascal had used a storage spell in his cloak to sneak the drink in, saying a barbecue without alcohol was no fun at all. Since the instructor would be making her rounds later, they had to drink it quickly. The fire crackled in the air as the party went on. Later, the instructor showed up, furious, holding several bottles in her hands and asking if they'd smuggled some too. In the end, she asked Helmet if they were telling the truth. And when he said yes, she left, telling him he was responsible for his team now, so he'd better be careful. She ordered them to eat, while everyone eyed each other suspiciously. When she left, they grabbed the bottle again and kept celebrating. Afterward, one of them thought the taste was too strong. Andro asked Helmet if he didn't like it, but that wasn't exactly it. Asuka even asked if it was about the trap, but they tried to reassure him, saying there was no danger he couldn't defeat. One even said Helmet was far better at fighting than they'd imagined. In the middle of the conversation, someone asked where he had learned swordsmanship. He said it was in the forest where he grew up. They remarked he must have had an incredible teacher to be so skilled, but Helmut replied that his teacher was no longer in this world. Everyone grew quiet and said they were sorry. Then they shouted to drop the heavy topic and just drink as much as they wanted. Helmut remembered, thinking Cian was right. Humans always draw closer when drinking. In the night, all was quiet. His companions were asleep all around. Helmut got up, saying he needed to vomit, and started walking into the forest. He looked around, knowing how to neutralize alcohol by sweating it out, but it was likely his hunter was watching now. He walked through the woods, moving cautiously. Ahead, he came across a house and thought it must belong to one of the camp overseers. Approaching it, he knocked twice until an old man opened the door, asking who he was. Seeing the academy uniform, he said he had found a trap in the forest and told the man to reinforce the patrols. The old man said anyone setting traps there faced heavy fines, but Helmut insisted he trusted his eyes. He was sure he'd seen one. If that was true, the old man said, it was serious. He closed the door, saying that starting tomorrow he would strengthen the patrols, since it was easy to hide a bear trap well. At that moment, Helmut stopped the door with his foot and gave him a sinister look. He had never said what kind of trap he'd seen. The old man gave a sly smile and apologized, saying most traps found around were for bears. Helmut noted the smile was too forced and said maybe he'd just been overthinking. He told the old man to be careful with traps, but before leaving, he added one more thing. Students from the department always came here, so he wanted to know where they were sent. The old man said the competition always took place in the northern mountains, same every year. Helmut thanked him and walked off, thinking he couldn't sense any vis from the man. Even so, his instincts pointed that way. He considered snapping the old man's neck, but decided not to act rashly. He walked on, thinking that when the mysterious enemy appeared, all he needed to do was counterattack. When he returned to camp, the instructor was hitting the boys, and she glared furiously at Helmut. After that, the night ended. The next day, everyone stood in line. Helmut was in the middle, holding his bow. The instructor began explaining the rules of the hunting competition, saying the most important thing was to keep themselves and their teammates safe. So, if one member of a pair was injured, the other had to contact them immediately. After the explanation, they were given a bow, arrows, a map, and provisions. Even though they would move in pairs, the ranking would be based on individual hunting results. One student asked if catching more animals meant winning. The instructor told the smart guys who wanted to kill a dozen rabbits that the ranking depended on the type of animal hunted. A fox was worth more than a rabbit, and a bear was worth more than a fox. With no further questions, the hunt began. Asuka said that at least they'd walk away with a win, since his partner would be Helmut. The other students asked if Asuka had no shame, since the two of them were the best in the department, but the instructor said they were free to choose their pairs, and Asuka walked off laughing at the other boys. Later, under the strong sun, Asuka said that if they joined forces, they'd be unstoppable in the department. In other words, they could take both the first and second place prizes. But Helmut wasn't paying attention. He was wondering if the hunter would show up. Behind him, Asuka asked if Helmut knew any good spots to hunt. At that moment, Helmut had an idea. If he let Asuka hunt first, he could make him return to camp alone, leaving Helmut free to do his work, so Helmut told him to follow. Up high, a large waterfall crashed onto the rocks. Helmut and Asuka appeared in the bushes. Helmut said animals tended to gather near rivers. Asuka asked if they'd have to stay all day, but if they kept moving, the animals would flee constantly. So Helmut concluded that hunting required patience until an opportunity appeared. He added that at night, he'd seen claw marks on the trees, indicating a large animal. Just then, they spotted a bear ahead, catching a fish. Asuka suggested they count to 3 and loose their shots together. They knocked their arrows. Helmut thought that if he killed animals, his seed might react, so he eased off his strength. They fired and hit the bear. As the animal ran, Asuka sprinted alongside, loosing more arrows. Ahead, he infused an arrow with vis and dropped the bear to the ground in a single hit, celebrating the hunt. Meanwhile, a heavy crashing came from the forest. Helmut frowned and immediately started running, saying that wasn't an animal. He went ahead to see what was happening, springing from side to side until he reached the top. From there, he saw one student injured and the other shaking with fear, unable to use the help crystal. Helmut dropped down, startling him. The student asked how he'd gotten there, but Helmut could see his partner had fallen into one of the traps he'd seen in the forest. The other begged for help, but Helmut said that if they pulled him out, he'd bleed a lot. Helmut went deeper into the forest and gathered some herbs from the ground. He bit one. From the taste, it seemed the right plant. He picked up a few stones and hurried back. He washed the stones and began grinding them together with the plant between. The boy watched, baffled, while Helmut asked if they were friends. He said yes. Helmet tore a strip from his shirt, making the boy gasp, then removed the trap, took an arrow from his quiver, and told him to hold Basil. He infused vis and struck the trap with the arrow, managing to break it while Basil trembled in pain. Helmet took the mashed plant from the stone and spread it over the wound where the trap had caught, explaining that this herb helps staunch bleeding. Then he told the boy to alert the instructors immediately. Helmet thought the one behind this was still just toying with them because the trap hadn't been properly set. In other words, the trap hadn't been meant for him. Then he turned, remembering he'd left Asuka alone, but Asuka appeared right behind, complaining that Helmet had forgotten the rule about always moving in pairs. Helmet exhaled in relief as Asuka asked what had happened. The other student finally managed to contact an instructor. He said Helmet was incredible. He hadn't known what to do in a situation like that. He bowed, thanking him for saving his friend. Helmet told him to keep an eye on the wound. It would be trouble if it got infected, while thinking that this was the first time he'd received a thank you at the academy. Later, the boy's leg was healed, and the old instructor said the first aid had been excellent, and Helmet deserved praise. The professor said, "Good work," and that since there really had been a trap, she would have to notify administration. She asked Wesley if he knew how it had happened. He pointed, saying he'd seen something and started running, but didn't know exactly what had happened since he'd been up ahead. So now they would take Basil to the central tent. She told Helmet and Asuka they could return to hunting, while the show-off bragged that he'd already taken down one of the big ones. She didn't react, even when he said she didn't need to be surprised. Helmet told him he could take the bear and head back to the main tent. He'd be along soon. Asuka asked if he was sure, but Helmet said he didn't fall for traps, and if they left a bear lying around, someone would snatch it and carry it off. So Asuka went on ahead and told him to be careful. Helmet ran on, thinking this was his chance. His hunter must be watching from somewhere. He used vis to probe for their position until he sensed something in his direction. He slashed and dropped to the ground, then looked up. A wire was strung between the trees. He grabbed the hanging wire. It was iron. If someone ran into that, it would be dangerous. Farther on, he found a deer tangled in the wires. That must be why Basil had started running. He raised his bow. He'd be taking this animal. Later, they showed the camp and all the game that had been taken, including Asuka's bear. Everyone stared, impressed. Someone said Helmet had gotten it, but Asuka shouted that Helmet had brought something else. The instructor asked if it was a deer, saying the meat was delicious. Then he congratulated them, saying they'd worked hard. He announced the prizes. 5th place would receive 10 meal vouchers. 4th place would get a quality ink and quill set. 3rd would get a bookstore voucher. 2nd place would get permission to use a private training room, and the grand winner would receive all of the above. Asuka came up saying he didn't need the quill set, and asking if anyone wanted it. The instructor continued announcing the rankings. That night, the bonfire blazed. One of the boys remarked that the private training room was an awesome reward and told Asuka not to pout about 2nd place. He yelled back, complaining that he'd brought down a bear, but 1st place had gone to someone who caught a rare fox. Helmet consoled him, saying at least he had a training room. In the end, Helmet placed 5th and got the meal vouchers. He said that thanks to Asuka, he'd be trying bear meat. They chatted, and someone said only the 3 of them were left because the other 2 had to return to the academy. Wesley, who'd carried Basil, got hurt when he fell off a collapsed bridge. Mitchell injured his leg after falling into a trap and had to be rushed back, so only 5 people remained in the group. Helmet thought it couldn't be mere coincidence and wondered whether to tell the others the truth. Asuka said those students would sleep all night in a soft bed while they had to sleep on the ground. They talked, and Helmet decided to say nothing to avoid making them more nervous, since the group activities would start early the next morning. The next day, they marched in files. Someone pointed to the area on the map and asked how long it would take to reach it. Helmet simply tugged his horse and told them to get moving. Later, the sun was setting, and one of them asked Helmet to check what was ahead. They went down and saw a small stream in front. That would be great. There was water, and they could make a fire nearby. Helmet went down and examined the water. From the look of it, nothing seemed wrong. While Asuka asked if he was thirsty, the others talked about unloading their packs quickly. Their backs ached from walking all day. Night fell, and they all sat around the fire. Helmet noticed everyone looked dejected and wondered if it was because the other 3 had had to go back. He stood up and said he'd fetch firewood. Asuka went along to help since the group was a bit down. The forest was already dark, and they picked up fallen sticks. Asuka asked if it was enough, but Helmet said the sticks were wet and couldn't be used. Asuka griped that it was hard to see branches in this dark forest. He told Helmut to chat, but Helmut just told Asuka to gather the right kind of wood. Asuka kept complaining about whoever had the bright idea to send everyone into the middle of a mountain. Helmut came over, handed him an armful of wood, and told him to take it back to camp. Asuka asked why he was acting like that, but Helmut had something urgent to deal with. So Asuka left, telling him not to do anything reckless and to come back soon. When no one was around, Helmut stayed focused on the night of the forest. Soon, he stepped closer, asking if the other had prepared enough, because in front of him he finally found his hunter. The clown thanked him for making this so entertaining, and since they had much to discuss, he told Helmut to sit on the log, so they sat facing each other. The clown asked what Helmut had to say after meeting his predator, but Helmut replied that the mask was ridiculous and that he couldn't respect someone who hid his face. The man looked at his spear and said Helmut was different from the others, because when people realized they were being hunted, they tried to run away. Helmut, however, turned his claws on the hunter himself. That, he said, meant they had a lot in common. So he would give him one last chance. He tossed something near Helmut, saying that he was an elite member of the Black Falcons, the assassin clown. But he also had the authority to appoint new talented members. So if Helmut wanted to join, he had to swallow that worm. If he refused the invitation, none of his friends would survive, because his men were already waiting for his command. Helmut looked at him and said it was a lie, that he didn't have any men nearby. The clown replied that the choice was his. Helmut thought about it, asking if he could really get away after injuring nobles. But the clown had already planned for that, sending the main nobles away in advance. That meant Helmut had no choice but to accept. Helmut stared at the ugly worm and asked what he had said earlier about them having so much in common. At that moment, he crushed the worm, saying the clown hadn't observed him well enough. Helmut lunged forward with his sword. The clown did something, and suddenly several iron wires appeared in Helmut's path. He slashed through them all, charging straight at the clown, saying he only needed to get rid of him to solve this problem. He cut with all his strength, but then sensed something strange. That aura passed behind him, saying he had wasted his chance and would not leave the forest alive. The next moment, the clown disappeared. Back at camp, the others heard a strange noise and wondered if it was a landslide. One of them asked where Helmut was, but Asuka said he had a stomachache. Then one came back with hay in his hands, asking if someone had tied the horses in another spot. Wesley said no one had touched them, but the problem was the horses were gone. They went to check, and only the ropes were left. While they were looking, a noise came from the forest, scaring everyone. They turned in fear, but it was only Helmut finally returning. They complained, telling him to check this out. The horses had vanished. Helmut thought it was better not to hide the whole truth, so he told them all to gather. Later, by the fire, everyone was nervous. One of them summarized, "The Black Falcons wanted revenge on Helmut and had sent an assassin to wipe them all out." The boys trembled with fear, and one complained that he had never done anything to the Black Falcons. Asuka slapped him on the head, saying nobody was going to die. They wondered if Sabbath was behind it, but that wasn't the case. Helmut explained that before he joined the academy, he had sent several Black Falcons straight to their graves. That was why they were after him, because back then he had been a rank 3 mercenary. Just hearing that made everyone stare in awe, realizing why he was always ahead in swordsmanship classes. Helmut said it wasn't fair for them to suffer because of him, so he would deal with it alone. One of them asked if it wouldn't be better to alert the instructors and told Asuka to grab the sphere, but when he reached into his pocket, it was gone. Everyone started arguing, furious that he had lost it. Helmut said there must already be traps laid everywhere, so it wasn't smart to head out at night. In the end, he decided he'd leave at dawn, even without the horses. But the assassin wouldn't sit still, so he said if he moved after the others, it would be impossible for the hunter to strike from the rear. That way, he would catch the hunter himself. Since they understood the situation, they all went to bed, preparing for the coming battle. Helmut stayed outside the tent, watching the forest, until 2 of them came out. He asked what they were doing, but they said they were going to take turns keeping watch in pairs. Helmut told them not to do anything foolish, but they said they were swordsmen too and had their pride. They asked if he wasn't going to sleep, but Helmut said he could go 3 days without sleep. James said he must have really scared the hunter if he hadn't shown up yet, but Helmut told him not to let his guard down, because that clown was persistent. At that moment, he told everyone to be quiet. He had heard something from the forest. He told everyone to be quiet. He had heard something from the forest. They all grabbed their swords and moved forward, spotting one of the horses. As soon as they spoke, Helmut turned and ordered them back from the forest, because the clown appeared above them, coming down with his claws and throwing something to the ground that filled the air with smoke. Asuka opened the tent, asking what had happened. James pulled his hair in terror, but Helmut calmed him, saying they had to stay alert. Trembling, James cried out that the clown had taken Dino, but Helmet told him if he didn't want to end up in a coffin, he had better control his emotions. At that moment, the other two came running, asking where Dino was. Helmet thought that Lunatic really knew how to play with someone's mind. James asked what they were going to do, saying they couldn't abandon Dino. One of them asked how they could save him, while another asked if Helmet agreed they should leave Dino behind. But if they all went together, they would be doing exactly what the assassin wanted. He grabbed Helmet by the collar, shouting that this was all his fault, and he wouldn't forgive him if he abandoned Dino. The others told James to calm down, while Helmet said he didn't want to put everyone in a situation where they risked all their lives for one person. The boy wanted to hit him, but the others restrained him so he could cool off. Then Helmet said what he had said wasn't a lie. Andros spoke up, saying he agreed with James that he couldn't run away and leave Dino behind. If they worked together, they could come up with something. Later, as the fire crackled, James came back, apologizing because he had been scared. Helmet sat down, saying he wanted to ask something. Right now, they didn't know where Dino was, and even if they all fought, there was no guarantee they'd return alive. So he asked if they still wanted to stay. James said he had known Dino since childhood and couldn't abandon him. Andros said it was shameful to run, and Asuka said he didn't like running from battles either. So since everyone agreed, they had no time to sleep. They would make a plan to rescue Dino and finish the hunter.